horizon, we never flew. A galaxy of eyes will never know the truths that hide beneath the show. The light of stars can burn too bright, so they built their truths in a cave of night. Illusion sold as futures bright in the mirage of the moon's soft light. Promises fade as echoes scream. Hope dissolves in this lunar dream. One man digs a rogue agent stray. He's seen the cracks, he's on the way. The voice they tried so hard to drown. Sid Tanner will bring this hoax down. Moving horizon, a mirage in the dark, chasing the heavens left.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic threw their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah. What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
All Things Unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
All right, Unexplained Ones. This is Dr. Mounts, and I'm joined tonight again by Smitty, and this is All Things Unexplained. Smitty, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm excited for this episode. This is right up our alley.
Yes, this is going to be the second time that we have dove into moon landing hoax theories, but tonight we've got two very special guests joining us. Bart Sibrel, who was on an epic episode of Joe Rogan a little while back, and his friend Jarrah White will be joining us tonight to discuss the moon landing. So I'm pretty stoked about that, Smitty.
Me too. And what is so weird, I moved to a new classroom, and on my chalkboard, I don't know what's that chalkboard, but it literally said the moon landing is fake when I walked in the room. That's
is synchronicity.
I know it's insane, but it's there. So.
And we've got people from all around the world already tuning in and joining us, like our friends UFO Busters, that UFO show Australia. And check out their YouTube channel if you haven't already. Our friend Christian Carroll is here with us already tonight. Our friend JP is here with us. Hello, JP. Apology Coroner is here. If the coroner has to issue an apology, what does that mean? I wonder. Can't be good.
I don't know. Something went wrong, apparently.
That can't be good, but thanks for joining us, Apology Coroner. And we've got folks from all around the world and UFO Busters there in Australia. And, of course, Jarrah.
Good mate.
Has an Australian accent. So he's going to be amongst the Australians here with us tonight. And, again, welcome to Christian Carroll. You know, they're going to be joining us after a couple commercial breaks, but we've got a lot of exciting things coming up here on All Things Unexplained, Smitty. And one I'm very excited about, I'm going to pull the banner up here, the poster, is I have been invited to be the moderator of a very special UFO debate in TRC, New Mexico. Smitty, you're welcome to join me there. It's October 10th, Friday, October 10th, a live UFO debate celebrating 1947's UFO legacy. It is Roswell versus Washington. So we're going to have a team from Roswell there and a team from Washington State there, and they're going to go head to head. May the best team win. And guess what? the way I like it. It's all up to me. It's all up to me
That's
who the
great.
winner is. So, I got invited to be the moderator there, and I think it's going to be on some local television. I think that some of us are going to get to talk about it on Coast to Coast AM even.
Wow,
So
that's awesome.
I know, very exciting, kind of a full circle moment there. As Coast to Coast AM was one of our big influences of this show,
From
and
a
that's
long way back.
Yep, and that's on October 10th in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Luckily, somebody informed me the locals don't say Truth or Consequences; they say T or C. So I'm glad somebody showed me that. And also, Smitty, October 7th, our friend Patricia Cornwell, her new book, Sharp Force, releases October 7th, and our exclusive interview with Patricia on Sharp Force will come out that day as well, October 7th, Sharp Force. And of course, we're in her last book, All Things Unexplained, is in Identity Unknown on page 164. And she's had some great things to say about All Things Unexplained again. And a busy time there, because on October 8th, we welcome Dr. Stephen Brule. Dr. Stephen Brule is going to be joining us to talk about modern scientific techniques to UAP research, applying modern scientific techniques to UAP research. So I think that's really exciting. He co-authored a paper, a preprint that went viral with Beatrice Villarreal on transients that have shown up in these observatory plates. And so we're super excited to have Dr. Brule here with us on October 8th. One thing you can do if you want to support the show, hit the subscribe button if you're on YouTube. If you're listening on the audio channel, hit the follow button and hit the like button. And you can also leave some feedback, leave some comments or review. Is that you, Smitty, on the magic pen?
No.
I came from somewhere. All right. Well, we're going to hit a commercial, and we will be right back with Bart Sibrel and Jarrah White after these commercials.
All Things Unexplained is free to watch on YouTube and listen to wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support our show, you can visit our YouTube store. Additionally, you can find us on Venmo under All Things Unexplained. Be sure to check out our website, allthingsunexplained.com. All proceeds from the sales of Dr. Mounce's books on Amazon and Audible also go straight to our show.
Want to be a real part of the show? One of the best ways you can support us is by visiting our official store. All you have to do is head over to unexplainedswag.com. There you can pick up podcast t-shirts, podcast hoodies, coffee mugs, and lots more, including our best-selling UFO t-shirt and UAP t-shirt. Just head over to unexplainedswag.com. You can also get to the store from our main website, allthingsunexplained.com, and from wherever you're listening or watching to us at. All right, we're joined tonight by Bart Sibrel and Jarrah White. Bart is an investigative journalist and filmmaker best known for his documentaries challenging the Apollo moon landings, including A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, for over 2 decades. He has been at the center of the moon landing debate. Smitty, you want to introduce Jarrah for everybody?
And we're grateful to have Jarrah White. He's also called the grandson of the moon hoax theory. He's a researcher and science communicator from Australia. He has produced extensive video series analyzing the Apollo missions and the physics behind space travel. We're excited to have you both tonight. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, guys, how's it going tonight?
It's going pretty good. How about you all?
Doing great. We got people from all around the world here tonight to say hello. Jarrah, how's it going over there?
Doing all right so far. Hello to my fellow Australians.
I see you brought up in the intro apology corner, and I wanted to point out that's very good news, because if a coroner is apologizing, it means you're still alive.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Or you could be a zombie. I don't know.
Hey,
I think
but you're still alive.
Yes. That's right. Undead, that's kind of this. That's okay. You know, Disney has a zombie show, and zombies go to high school now, apparently, and are very popular. Who knew? They're even on the football team. So I think that's okay nowadays to be a zombie. Well, guys, before we dive into the evidence of the moon landings, I think we would all love to know, how did each of you get started along this whole moon landing path?
Do you want to go first, Bart, or shall I?
Yeah, go ahead, Jarrah.
Well, I grew up as a huge fan of space exploration and science in general. You know, I watched a lot of space documentaries as a kid. I watched a lot of news reports. I collected space books since I was a kid, and later in my teenage years, I learned of the moon landing hoax theory. And I thought, okay, this is interesting, and I went back to everything I had learned previously about the Apollo missions, about the space exploration and all that. And I seeked out the various books and videos on the subject. Like this one here is NASA Mooned America by Ralph Renee. And this one here, should have actually shown this one first. This one here is We Never Went to the Moon by Bill Casey. He was the first guy to actually basically come out of the closet and say, yes, it was all a hoax. He worked at the company Rocketdyne, which was the company that built the engines on the Saturn V, and he basically he published that back in the 1970s, and that's the expanded edition from 1980s. Renee published his book, which basically went into all the technical side of things, much the same way I like to go into the technical side of things. And so, of course, whilst I picked up all these books and videos on this subject, I also learned of various what they call themselves pro-Apollo websites, Apollo hoax debunk websites. I just call them propaganda websites, because reading through all these websites, it quickly became apparent that they weren't so much trying to disprove the theory as they were trying to muddy the waters and misrepresent their opponents' arguments. You know, they were built largely on the hope that their audience, their viewers, were without ready access to this kinds of materials, all these research materials, the data on solar flares or the Van Allen belts or this or that. And so after Bill Casey died, he was belligerently trolled by these propagandists, and I got so pissed that I decided to write a thorough rebuttal to this stuff they were putting out. That rebuttal ended up becoming the size of a phone book. And well, I had done my film and TV course, and I decided, well, why don't I make it into a video series? It was originally going to be just a 3-part series, but it ended up being an ongoing series, well over 100 videos. It's called the Moonfaker series, and that's how I became involved in this stuff.
Oh, very interesting, Bart. What about you?
Well, like Jarrah, I grew up believing that the moon landings were real. I'm a little bit younger than him. Oh, I'm sorry, older. And I was 4 years old at the time, asleep in bed past my bedtime. But my dad was in the Air Force. And we know now from an eyewitness that it was filmed at an Air Force base. He gave me these publicity pictures of Apollo 11, and I put them up on my bedroom wall. And they were my most cherished possession. And they're literally mesmerizing, especially if you see like 15 of them side by side every day from the age of 4 to 14. If I only saw them once a day, that's seeing them 3,650 times, believing that they're real, and even more than real, being like thinking how wonderful, how magical. And then as a 14-year-old, fortunately with an open mind, I saw, as Jarrah suggested, Bill Casey on a television program, and he said it never happened. And I'm like, oh, I thought of that. So I went back and looked at the pictures, eyes wide shut, and sure enough, in the original pictures, the foreground soil is a different color than in the current pictures, and it made the fake backdrops more discernible. And I'm thinking, isn't that interesting? And then fast forward another 10 years, at 24, I'd become a filmmaker. And a filmmaker's job is to make fake scenes look real. And I could tell you with 100% certainty, not only were they filmed with an electrical light, I could tell you what kind, because I had them in my closet. You know, this particular, just like a wine connoisseur can tell you this wine came from this region and it's this old. I could tell you what kind of light they used. And as serendipity would have it, I was editing one day for the man who produced the show I saw as a 14-year-old 10 years earlier. He put me in touch with Bill Casing, who suggested that I make a movie called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Go to the homepage of Sibrel.com. S as in Sam, IP as in boy, REL. Sibrel.com. It's $1 million movie financed by someone who builds rockets for NASA, who knows the moon missions are fake. I was producing the film under the theory it might be true. There were certain things that didn't seem right about it. The shadows intersecting at 90 degrees that should be parallel in sunlight, the behavior of the astronauts, the Soviets being more advanced, the resignation of NASA's administrator right beforehand. A lot of it seemed a little odd to me. And lo and behold, we found classified footage of fake photography. You pop in the tape, it says don't show to the public, and they're faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they actually did fake the moon landing. How sad is that? And I was working as a reporter at NBC. I showed it to the news director. He practically fainted and refused to broadcast it for fear it would cause a civil war if the American public found out the moon landings were fake. And years later, another news director got a hold of the footage. They fly me to New York, the headquarters of NBC, put me up in a fancy hotel, Waldorf Astoria, pay me thousands of dollars for the exclusive license of this footage. Like I said, it's on the homepage of Sibrel.com. And they got a threatening phone call from someone in the United States government who told them they're going to pull the plug on NBC if they broadcast the footage. Because that second NBC news director also agreed it proved they did not go to the moon because they're faking being halfway to the moon, meaning they can't leave Earth orbit. And here we are 57 years later, they still can't leave Earth orbit. So who would know that the poster child, really the poster child of conspiracy theories is faking the moon landing, right? It's the number one thing. What's her name from YouTube? Susan whatever, who's now dead, said we need to do censorship to stop people from saying things like the moon landings are fake, to stop people from saying the truth about the government being so corrupt. And my book is kind of the behind the scenes story, goes into great detail. People told me not to put information in the movie to release it after their death, including my interview of 4 hours with Betty Grissom, who told me that her husband, who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, was murdered by the CIA for being a whistleblower during the Apollo program. And so not only are they faking moon landings, they're murdering their own citizens, and we're paying for it with our taxes. And when it dawns on you that this is actually true, and what's unique about Jarrah, he and I have we're friends and we love each other, but we have kind of different personalities. And some would even say extremely different. And yet we're realists. We both agree they sadly did fake the moon landing. And if governments like that are out large, murdering their own people to cover it up, the fact that they faked it is more profound than if they had actually gone. So we have this great truth that is being hidden from mankind. And all the evidence is there at Jarrah's website or my website, Sibrel.com.
Yeah, real scary stuff. And of course, at some point tonight, we're going to get into some of what you were talking about that's fully on display in the recently released JFK files in terms of, government trust in the CIA, FBI, NASA, and even others. And I want to say, yes, sir, Jared, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to mention that Bart brought up the death of the Apollo 1 astronauts, and I feel this is a good opportunity to mention that there was another individual who was killed, and this is actually what really set casing off to investigate the Apollo hoax. Is that a safety inspector by the name of Thomas Ronald Barron, who worked for the company North American Aviation, which was the company that built the Apollo command capsule. He had made up it compiled together a 55-page report, basically detailing all these various safety violations and shoddy workmanship that had been done. He was strongly critical of North American aviation for their basically chaotic practices on putting this capsule together. And he was also critical of NASA for not being there more frequently to oversee all these things, make sure, hey, you don't do it like that, you put these things right. He compiled this report together, and when nothing was done, he leaked it to the press. He got fired. After the Apollo 1 fire, he expanded it into a 500-page report, and he basically testified before Congress, basically explaining his findings. He also made the argument that the astronauts had tried to actually get out longer than was reported by NASA. They say that there was only about something like 15 seconds that went by from the first mention of fire to when the capsule ruptured. If you can understand, the capsule is pressurized to about 20 psi of pure oxygen. Okay, the air we're sitting in right now is about 14.7 psi. So, their rationale for doing that is to simulate the conditions in space, because the spacecraft was only supposed to be 5 psi in space. You would want to put the pressure up above atmospheric pressure to simulate the conditions in space. But of course, normally what you would do is you want to have the pressure test done separately. You wouldn't have people in there. If you were, you would put regular air in there, because pure oxygen is extraordinarily flammable. If in pure oxygen, stainless steel will burn. Okay. But anyways, what happened is that one of his witnesses is a fellow by the name of Al Holmberg. He reported that at least 15 minutes had gone past from the first mention of fire to when it blew up. Basically, he reported the astronauts were trying to get out, trying to make an escape attempt. Okay. Now Holmberg, he later denied what he told the Baron, but the report was similar stories have actually been spoken of by other witnesses to the fire. One of them was Gary W. Probst, who always maintained that it was at least 3 minutes that he saw from the first mention of fire to when the flames covered up the windows. He was actually watching the fires on the TV. He was screaming, "Blow the hatch! Why don't they blow the hatch?" He didn't know at the time that the door could not be opened explosively like you could do it on the Gemini and Mercury. But anyways, after Barron testified, he was later found dead at a railroad crossing with his wife and stepdaughter. Their car had been struck by a train, and his 500-page report disappeared. Now, Casing, he managed to acquire a copy of the 55-page report. He acquired that from a senator in 1981, and he published about just under half of it in his book. Now, NASA, they only published the first 6 pages on their website, just the first 6 pages. They kept the full. They didn't publish a full version or anything like that. I've been searching for the full copy for years, and just recently, just a few days ago, I found a full copy of the 55-page report, and that's now available on my website.
Very cool. We need to check that out. Maybe you can come back on sometime and talk with us about that report, Jerry, after we have a chance to go through it. And certainly. I want to say shout out to Apology Corner for one, being a good sport, as we were talking about the meaning of your name, but 2, thank you so much for sending us a super sticker for $3. We really appreciate that. Super stickers and super chat is available in the YouTube live chat. Just look down there by the chat bar, and you'll see the icon for super chat and super stickers. So thanks so much, Apology Corner. We're joined by folks all around the world right now to talk tonight with Bart Sibrel and Jarrah White about the moon landing hoax. So if you're in the chat, please say hello and let us know that you are here. So I would like to start getting into some of this evidence, and Smitty actually wanted to bring up some of these classic evidence points with you guys.
Well, I actually wanted to talk about something today. What about, I wanted to get your opinion about the sound theory. You know what I'm talking about, where the astronaut is driving the stake, and then NASA had put something up in a website for kids, and it says no sound would be heard on the moon. Do you know what I'm referring to?
I think you're talking about how there's a sound of him throwing something, and it hits the outside of the lunar module, and it makes a sound. We hear it bang. There's also another case where he's hammering with the core tube sample thing into the ground. You
exactly.
Can hear the bang. Yeah. That's a good piece of evidence, because the way they would communicate, they would have little microphones inside the helmet, and it should also be pointed out that the microphone doesn't have much of a range. They always say, oh, that's why you can't hear engine noise when it's ascending, because it doesn't have much of a range. Well, you should still hear them talking. They're trying to talk above this loud engine. But if it doesn't have much of a range, it's inside the thing. How are we hearing something hitting the walls of the lunar module, and how are we hearing them bashing something into the ground? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, what's your opinion on the expulsion? You know, when it actually supposed to come up off of the moon surface, and it not leaving any significant signs of it having been hit by that rocket.
Well, Smitty, you know, there's a lot of evidence that indicates they didn't go to the moon. And in my opinion, more evidence proves that it was fraudulent than if they're real. All that we have is a TV picture controlled by the federal government with no independent press coverage. And we have an eyewitness who saw them film that image at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. You could talk about the flag blowing in the wind or the sound. What you're talking about, Smitty, the engine, we have one interview I did in Astronauts Gone Wild where the astronaut says the engine was very loud and the other person says it's very quiet. You know, which is it? I would say let's focus on the simple things. If you allow me to present something, I'm going to do share screen here.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see, allow. You let me know when it shows up.
Okay.
Let's see here. That would be this one, I think. Okay, so you're seeing the Sibrel.com logo?
Yes.
Okay, so here's Sibrel.com. My book, Moon Man, which is in audio, Kindle, and print, has, I think, 17 interactive video links. Here's a book about aliens. So it's, as far as I know, the first book that is interactive, where I
Bart,
write.
are you trying to show your website? We just see your face. We just see your face.
I think you're on the wrong tab.
I'm on the wrong tab. Let's see here. Let's see here. I need to present. I could go to the other one. So are you seeing it now over here?
No, we're back to the main
You're still
page.
seeing my face. Let me try it again. So many buttons, so little time.
Maybe send the link in the
simplest proof here. Let's see here. Well, I hit present, and
I mean, this is to me kind of telling, though. Look how far our technology has come, and kind of some of the struggles we still go through. But yet, in the 60s, they have us believe that we took off from the planet Earth, went into space, landed on the moon, and then I've always heard the most complicated part of all would have been taking back off from the moon and returning to Earth.
That's what I was.
Okay, so do you have it now or no?
We've got something. There we go.
Okay, so here you go, Sibrel.com. The book, my Aliens book, and Moon Man have video links that are interactive, and there are 4 things on the homepage. Here
Bart, we're seeing the Streamlabs link. You might be showing the wrong tab. You want to bring up the maybe
I can
just
see
post
your
the link in
tab.
private chat. Yeah.
Well, you're seeing it over here.
You're sharing your entire screen, and I can see the tab you're wanting to share. You just need to click on it when it says stream this to your audience.
Yes, blue, isn't it?
Yeah, I see.
Maybe just post the link in the private chat, then maybe they can share it for you.
What do you see now?
Yeah, we could pull it up on the screen if you put the link in the. Actually, I can pull it up if you want to just put the link in the private chat, and I can pull it up pretty easily, Bart.
Yeah, just go to Sibrel.com.
Bart, you might want to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, let me take this off.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, I'm on Sibrel.com, and I'll pull it up here for you, Bart, and you can just walk everybody through it. Let's see here.
How are we going to get to the moon if we can't share the videos properly?
There you go. So click on that
I know,
first video.
that's right.
Click
Okay,
on that
so
first video that says moon fraud in 3 minutes.
all right, here we go.
And just kind of scan forward for a second.
Scan forward to win.
Yeah, and then make it full screen.
All right.
And then keep going a little forward. Okay, so here, pause there. This is how shadows should look in sunlight. The sun is about 93 million miles away. It's about 1,000 times bigger in diameter, 1,000,000 times bigger in volume than the Earth. It's going to cast shadows in the same direction over an entire continent, moon, whatever. This is 2 telephone poles. You can go outside in your parking lot at lunchtime or your front yard when there's a cloudless day, and you'll see shadows always run parallel. They cannot intersect. It's mathematically, scientifically impossible for shadows to intersect if they're taken from sunlight. So move the video forward a little bit and then pause it when you go to the other picture.
All right. Let's see.
Keep going
I believe
forward.
it's this one.
There you go. And then so here's a picture that they claim was from the last mission to the moon, where the astronaut shadow is at 12 o'clock and a rock about 5 feet away is at 9 o'clock. So that's a 90-degree difference from objects 5 feet apart. That is a very close electrical light, or 2 electrical lights that are very close. It's impossible for shadows to intersect in sunlight, which means it's electrical light, which means they're on Earth. There you go. You just proved the moon landing fraud in one picture. What more proof do you need? You cannot replicate that picture in sunlight. It can only be replicated with an electrical light, which means they faked it. In fact, the smartest AI in the world 2 years ago at an AI conference, again, this is not ChatGPT, this is an AI not available to the public. It is called Google's neural network. It has a deep fake detector program that has never been wrong. You can feed it a video of Biden or Trump. It'll tell you in 1 second whether it's a deep fake or not. Someone fed it pictures of the 2018 probes of China on the moon, unmanned probes, and it said the pictures are genuine. Then it fed it pictures of the Apollo program, and every single one it said had a fake backdrop. That the pixels don't line up from the foreground to the background, which was a video or still projection in the background. So the smartest AI just said the moon pictures are fake. You can see with logic right in front of your eyes, the moon pictures are fake. Why do people not accept simple facts? If a college professor who I talked to teaching aerospace at a major university, I said, well, what if Neil Armstrong confessed that the moon missions were fake? He said he would still think he walked on the moon anyway. You see, people are not open-minded. They have made a god out of putting a man on the moon, the god of science, the god of America, whatever. And it's pretty sad because the fact is the most profound event, or one of the most profound in human history, is not putting a man on the moon. It's the faking of the moon mission by the most powerful nation on earth that hypocritically claims to be the most righteous. And so what do you do? I don't know. Pray for divine intervention.
You know, I heard a very interesting thing along the lines of what you were talking about here, Bart. It's on a little thing on cognitive dissonance. And a researcher was saying, you know, you can take someone that has these deep personal beliefs about something, and you can present them with stark, concrete, profound evidence to the contrary of their personal beliefs. And it will not sway their personal beliefs in any way whatsoever. And as a matter of fact, it will actually bolster their personal beliefs about the subject. So the actual showing people with cognitive dissonance concrete evidence to the contrary, they actually in their minds take it as support or evidence for their personal beliefs. So I think that it can really be an uphill battle here in today's society when we're dealing with cognitive dissonance. Bart, did you have anything else in this particular video you wanted me to stream to?
Let me take a look at it. Well, there's the footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. That takes some explanation. You could go to Sibrel.com and click on Moonman video links and cue that up. We have them faking being halfway to the moon using a representation of the Earth floating in space rather than the real Earth floating in space. We found the unedited version. Click on the Moonman links there in the top left. And then go to the one that says smoking gun. Right there, all the way to the right, first row. And for simplification, we'll just queue up part of that. Go ahead and click on that one. Moonman link, I think, number 4.
Yep, smoking gun.
Mm-hmm. They were in Earth orbit the entire time. That way they could fly up in front of witnesses and splash down in front of witnesses and have the peanut butter sandwich float by in zero gravity. But the fact is they never left Earth orbit. I mean, here we are 57 years later, and they still cannot leave Earth orbit. I mean, come on. They can drive cars and play golf on the moon with 1960s technology, and the best they could do today is have mannequins orbit the moon. So here we have them faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit. This is what 2 NBC news directors agreed proves that the missions were fake. And this is the one that the federal government threatened NBC not to broadcast. They paid for the license. They were ready to produce the program, ready to go, and it was canceled. So just click on that one. I don't know if it's showing up or not.
It doesn't seem to be showing just yet. I'm just waiting for him to load it. When he's done,
I've got it on my.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got it on my screen. It seems to be a little lagging behind on the other screen. Let me take it off and pull it back up.
Well, while you're trying to fix that up, I would like to mention as well that just what Bart was talking about the shadows. He mentioned you can't replicate this with sunlight. Let me tell you, I tried. The very first video that I produced in the Moonfaker series was basically me trying to replicate the shot. The people would argue, oh, it's just the perspective of the shadows towards the horizon, or it's the rough terrain. I tried this way, I tried that way. I couldn't get the shadows to intersect at a 90-degree angle. Not when they were so close together as shown in the Apollo image. The only way you could realistically do something like that would if you were using a fisheye lens or something, which obviously the Apollo astronauts, they didn't have a fisheye lens. And so, so it's astonishing, really.
So go ahead and cue that image up, or let's see, you could show it now. They're basically on the right. It says Neil Armstrong calling in from 130,000 miles out. If you lower your mouse so we can see the right screen a little bit better, make that full screen if you can. So there on the right is the part that was shown to the public.
Oh, I see.
That they claim is the Earth floating in space. Here we see that it's actually the circular window of the spacecraft with the camera at the back of the spacecraft. They've turned out all the lights and they put a little transparency, a photograph of the Earth over the circular window. That's Michael Collins breaking down the shot. We have the unedited version, you see? So it's not. That's a 1-foot representation of the Earth floating in space. Here's an outtake that they never showed to the public. And you can see Michael Collins's hairy arm get in front of the window. You see that? That's actually the window of the spacecraft. So what we have is them faking being halfway to the moon. So if they really went to the moon, why would they be faking any of it? And if they're faking being halfway to the moon, it's because they cannot go halfway. You see that? So the lights come up, and over on the right, they just said that's the Earth floating in space, but now we see on the left, it's not. It's really the circular window of the spacecraft being made to look like the Earth floating in space. This is the exact same image a moment ago they said was the Earth floating in space. This is the unedited version. That's why it said do not show to the public at the beginning of it. And you'll see they're messing around. They're going to try to remove the photograph. It's kind of like a transparency or a positive slide. There they are, removing it from in front of the window. See that? The arm. And then you'll see the lights come up. And in fact, it is not the Earth floating in space. It's really the window of the spacecraft being made to look like the Earth floating in space. So we have them, caught them faking being halfway to the moon. The point is, if they really went to the moon, why would they be faking any of it? And if they're faking being halfway, it's because they cannot go halfway. They cannot leave Earth orbit. So that's the second proof. First proof, shadows intersecting at 90 degrees. It proves it's an electrical light, which means they're on Earth. Secondly, they're faking being halfway to the moon because according to the flight log, they're supposed to be 130,000 miles out, but clearly they're still in Earth orbit. And if they really went, why would they fake any of it? And if they're faking being halfway, it's because they cannot go halfway. Otherwise, we'd see the real Earth outside of the window. So that's the second proof. The third proof is logic. Today, with 57 years, better rockets and computers, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is only 1,000th the distance to the moon. So how could they have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 than today? Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927. Imagine 57 years later, 1982, that the farthest an airplane could go, when it could go 3,000 miles in 1927, in 1982, it could only go 3 miles.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I want Jarrah's take on something. But before I get to that, and this reminds me of something from the UFO community, but before I get to that, thank you so much to Apology Corner for another super chat. Apology Corner says, I do like this halfway to the moon evidence. And thanks to all the people that are joining us around the world right now. Literally, we got people from Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, all in here with us and joining us for this wonderful conversation with Bart Sibrel and Jarrah White tonight on All Things Unexplained. If you hadn't hit the subscribe button already, or the like button, or if you haven't shared this live video out, please give it a consider doing that right now. One of the things that really sets All Things Unexplained apart, I believe, is the ability for people to come in and join us live and be a part of the show, just like this here. Bart and Jarrah, this actually, what you're showing here, Bart, reminds me of two recent incidents from the UFO community. One was at a conference of sorts, and a photo was shared, and it was purported to be of a giant UFO mothership, over the landscape. And I wonder if what you were showing us there, if that were to be shown today, how long would it take people to debunk it? Because I think it would go by pretty fast. Well, this giant mothership, let me get that off, turns out it was literally the reflection in the window of the chandelier in the room from whence the person was taking the photograph. But it gave the appearance of actually being out in the landscape. And that reminded me of the videos you're just showing. And then another video recently, Bart, at the UAP, one of the UAP hearings, they showed this photograph. It was an aerial photograph. And it looked like a huge flying saucer floating over the land. It actually was, and it didn't take but less than an hour for people to find the exact GPS location of this. It was actually an irrigation circle in the Midwest somewhere that is used, it's just like where they water the crops. It was just an irrigation circle of sorts that was very common. So go ahead, Bart. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, what's happening, and that's great that you bring that up, Tim, is people want to believe in UFOs. And it's fascinating. Just like the pictures of the Apollo moon missions on my bedroom wall, even though they were taken in a TV studio, they were mesmerizing. I wanted to believe. If your team wins the Super Bowl, you want to believe they won. If someone says they cheated, they paid the referee, they moved the goalpost, they drugged the Gatorade of the other team, you don't want to hear it. You want to believe in it. And that's the problem. Even though there's interesting credibility to Roswell, there's interesting credibility to that flyover over the Capitol. I think you probably know what year that was, 1950 something. And right. Bob Lazar, to me, appears to be telling the truth. Even though that's true, we have to keep in mind that the greatest fraud of the 20th century, we had every TV station, every radio station, every magazine said men were on the moon, when in fact they were at an Air Force base in Clovis, New Mexico, a year earlier on videotape. And that'll be the fourth proof, the eyewitness testimony coming up. People wanted to believe it. Now, von Braun, Nazi von Braun, was in charge of faking the moon landing, right? It's like, I mean, do you understand? It's the greatest historic event, and it's a fraud. So what would be the next greatest historic event? It would be the appearance of aliens. And as you know from the clip of his secretary, von Braun warned that the federal government that faked the moon landing is planning on faking an alien invasion as well. Now, why are there congressional hearings about UFOs? Are there congressional hearings about 9/11? No. Are there congressional hearings about who shot JFK? No. Are there congressional hearings about the moon landing fraud? No. So why are they congressional hearings about UFOs? Because they want us to believe in them. They're going to fake, according to von Braun, an alien invasion. Now, my opinion about these events, I wasn't around when JFK happened, but if Bobby Kennedy Jr., who has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone, says his uncle was killed by the CIA with 100% certainty, I take his opinion. And if engineers say it's impossible for a pinhole airplane to go through a steel grid and cause it to collapse, I trust their opinion. Just look at Oklahoma City bombing. Half the building blown away. It didn't collapse, did it? And so if the top two UFO researchers, Jacques Vallée and Alan Hynek, say the following: number one, UFOs are real. Number two, they're not from outer space, they're from Earth. And number three, they're demonic. Now, my second book at Sibrel.com talks about this. Even though UFOs are real and even though aliens are real, what they really are is not extraterrestrials. That this is some sort of demonic influence, because when people are being abducted, they invoke the name of Jesus and the UFO aliens run away. If they're from some other world, why would the name Jarrah, Smitty, Tim, Bart, Buddha, Jesus, why would that matter, right? And then, very interestingly, they abduct sperm and eggs from people they hijack, right? Now, why sperm and eggs? According to the Bible, actually in Leviticus, it says don't crossbreed species. Don't do GMOs. Little side note, since GMOs were introduced, fertility rates have dropped by 65%. You take a horse and a donkey to get a mule, the mule is sterile. It stops there. You have to keep going back. So if these entities are really fallen angels, a hybrid of human and fallen angels, that means they're sterile. That's why they're abducting sperm and eggs to reproduce themselves. And at Sibrel.com, there's one of the links of the Planet X book. A brilliant high school student went through 500,000 genealogical names of presidents and found they're all related, blood related, except for one. The Bible says there will be a war between the bloodline of Adam and the bloodline of Lucifer, the world leaders, the fallen angels, something like that. So even though UFOs are real, they are not from outer space. They're actually from Earth. And this is the opinion of the top two experts. And that's what this book is about. And it has, I think that book at Sibrel.com has something like 27 links to back this up. So I would say hold congressional hearings about JFK, 9/11, the moon landing, if they're really interested in the truth, but they're not. Because this guy they've been parading around on all the news stations, when he's pressed on the issue, did you personally see an alien? Did you personally see a UFO? He says, no. But my superiors told me that they exist.
Right. And, Bart, I think a lot of what you just said is being talked about in the back channels. I could tell you this, Bart, you may find this very interesting. We've had astrophysicist Kevin Knuth on with us many times, and he's part of an organization that investigates UAPs called UAPX. Well, Kevin told us that as far as he can tell, there's really no evidence that extraterrestrials or UFOs or that UFOs come from outside the Earth. All the evidence suggests they're just already here. And he said that they have presented to every 3-letter and probably 4-letter organization out there about UAPs, and that every one of them asked them this one question. And that question was, what are your capabilities for detecting UAP underwater? And that ought to tell us something. He said the evidence does not point to them coming from outer space anywhere.
Under the water would be the perfect place to hide. Now, let's just say theoretically they did go to the moon in 1969, right? Imagine the technology if human civilization existed 6,000 years later. It'd be extraordinary. So if fallen angels, according to the book of Enoch, taught mankind weaponry and how to melt metals into tools and pharmacology, imagine the technology they would have today 6,000 years later. And I say they're mimicking extraterrestrials, because how can it be proven? I'm from some planet 300 million light years away. Disprove it, right? And they're liars. And if you look at this recent DNA study called the Eve Project, it took blood samples from every nationality on Earth, and with DNA technology went backwards in time and said every human who ever lived, is alive, or will ever live came from one woman in Africa, no one before her, no evolution. She suddenly appeared. Now, because that matches the Bible and people who run the world worship something other than God, they said, okay, well, that's true, but aliens made mankind, not God. They never asked the rudimentary third grader question I would ask: if we were made by aliens, then who made the aliens? And they forget that the scriptures say that Satan wanted to ascend to the throne of God. So if we're made by aliens, and aliens are really fallen angels and their leader is Lucifer, then they're saying mankind was made by Lucifer instead of God. And what's the name of the Apollo rocket? Apollyon. In the book of Revelation, that's a name for Lucifer. And so how ironic, the greatest accomplishment of mankind says lie right on the side of the rocket, and people accept it anyway.
We definitely need you back on the show to delve deeply into some of these topics with us, Bart, if you would join us again. And funny you should mention Apollon, some synchronicity there, because we've talked about some Apollon connections to CERN and the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, and found out some very disturbing things about what happens over there. Matter of fact, we won't even get into it, because that's a really deep, no pun intended, well there. I had to have a little laugh a while ago, because friend of the show, Pix, chimed in, and thank you, Pix, for joining us. He said, "Oh, Tim, you're now off this person's Xmas list." Good show, by the way. I'm not going to say that person's names, because I didn't say their name to start with, but Pix knew what I was talking about. He knew what I was talking about, but I didn't say anybody's name. So don't put that juju on me, Pix. Nobody's names were mentioned. So we're not going to go there. I do want to throw it back over to Jarrah real quick. And Jarrah, what were your impressions of the footage we saw from Bart there?
Sorry, I muted my microphone. I thought it was very interesting that he had found this footage of the of them faking a shot of being halfway to the moon using a transparency over the window. Now, I've had my own. You asked earlier, how would people go about debunking this stuff? Well, a lot of people have tried, and I've had my 2 cents worth to say along those lines. One of the things people would argue is that you can see the clouds moving, or the Earth rotating the pictures. Well, no, you can't. I look at the intervals, the time intervals in question. There's no changes that cannot be attributed to video distortion. Analog video in those days wasn't really known for its clarity. But then there's another particular video from Apollo 11, which supposedly it shows here's the Earth far away, but then we see the camera zoom back out. We can see it now framed completely in the window. Then it disappears behind the window. They would constantly cite this particular video over and over and over and over again, as if that disproved Bart's video. First of all, we need to discuss these videos on a case-by-case basis. Okay, the one that Bart found, that was shot using a transparency of the window. This one, I believe, when I saw that, because if you actually look at the full video, there's no continuous shot between interior and exterior. Every time the camera goes back inside the spacecraft, the camera either cuts or it blacks out. Right, as was the case with this particular video, they didn't show any astronauts flying around in the same shot as the Earth outside the window. And so I believe for that particular one, they had used a globe, a physical globe outside the window of a CSM mock-up, and that was then sandwiched between actual flight footage. Now, interestingly enough, Bart actually pointed this out in Astronauts Gone Wild. When they were doing this in the full video, they actually mentioned that this. They said something to the extent of, we see no white spots as we saw on 10, implying that this is a similar shot they did on Apollo 10. And Bart, he actually asked John Young about that. Interestingly, I decided to investigate that. After Bart found the videos, there's a company called Spacecraft Films, which started releasing the NASA footage on video. I found their Apollo 10 DVD set, and this is sold as, it clearly says, complete and unedited. Complete TV and onboard film. Okay, keep that keyword is complete. I took the videos, I found the transcripts, the official NASA transcripts, and I was cross-referencing what the astronauts were saying with what was said in the transcript. And I noticed that there were various moments that we have shots showing the Earth far away, and the camera would cut mid-sentence. No signs that they cut the video and started again sometime later. No, the audio is still playing, uninterrupted. Okay, which indicated that this shot was filmed in advance and edited together. There was other cases where the footage would be missing, like there would be a break in the camera would cut, and then the dialogue would have jumped to much later in the transcript. But even though it would jump later to the script, the Houston control, they were still saying, yes, we're still receiving the footage, we're still getting the footage. Well, where is it? Where is it in this complete footage? So what I produced a documentary called Flagging the Gems. This was published on my old YouTube channel. This was in 2007, quite a long time ago. This was in 2007 when I published that Flagging the Gems. And literally a few days after it got published, Mark Gray, the guy who owns Spacecraft Films, he filed a DMCA takedown on my video and got my old YouTube account suspended. Even though this is public domain NASA footage, he has no claim to that. Right? And so he was basically trying to suppress the fact that this footage from Apollo 10 shows evidence of fakery, and it also shows evidence that his supposed complete DVD set is not complete at all. So,
well, there was another important part that they edited out. And if you want to get it ready, I'll try to find it. Go back to Sibrel.com homepage and then click on the main window on the homepage. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. There's an audio segment that they edited out. And I'm going to bring up my timer here so you can see. So go to.
Let me get this up here.
Okay, go to 3420. And a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which is on the homepage of Sibrel.com. Go back one, just click on Sibrel.com, or you could click on the film, click number 2, either one. And then there you go. It's over there on the right.
All right, which one do you want, Bart?
Yeah, the top right of the 4.
Oh, I see.
And then make that full screen. Go to 3420, and then make sure we have the audio. This is the audio that spacecraft films deleted from their presentation. Right, you're almost there. Yeah, 3420.
Prompts them with talk. Immediately, Neil Armstrong
I need to
speaks.
pause. Okay, pause right here for a second. Okay, let me describe it. As you can see, the fade is about ready to happen. We're about to go to the infamous window shot of the fake Earth, when in fact this is the circular window of the spacecraft. At the very beginning, NASA speaks. Then there's exactly a 4-second delay. Then we hear a third party that's not NASA, not the astronauts, say, talk. And then Neil Armstrong speaks. They were creating a fake radio delay because they never left Earth orbit, which is only about 250 miles above the Earth. So to pretend that they're farther away from the Earth, they were being prompted by the CIA and a third track of audio that they had an earpiece for. And this classified footage recorded that audio of the CIA. Again, you're going to hear NASA speak. You're going to count off 4 seconds of dead air. You'll hear a third party, not NASA, not the astronauts, say talk. And then Neil Armstrong speaks. They're faking a 4-second radio delay. Go ahead and hit play.
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over. Okay, Roger.
So there you go. They just faked a 4-second radio delay.
They are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance.
They deleted talk. They actually deleted talk. Now, why would they delete it? Why? If it's there on the original. You see, we have proof that they're faking a 4-second radio delay, and that Earth that you see is really the circular window of the spacecraft.
Wow. That is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I know. It's remarkable, and that's why they edited it out. And Jarrah's completely right. They edited out many telling things from their video. Their video wasn't released until after my film came out to make this footage look like it was ordinary. No one had seen this footage until my film came out. And then so they scrambled, they released it, and to make my footage look like, it wasn't anything special. But they edited out talk. They edited out the significant parts that reveal the fraud. It is them faking being halfway to the moon. Even critics agree. It is them faking being halfway to the moon.
There's something else that they...
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's something else that the spacecraft films edited out, or would rather claim didn't exist. There was, I mentioned earlier about how that guy, Gary Props, was watching the Apollo 1 fire on the monitors. The spacecraft films, they actually released do I have it here? So here it is. They actually released a DVD for the Apollo 1 incident, and they had the audio from the fire. But they put it in writing. They said there is no video footage of the Apollo 1 fire, and yet on the day of the fire, it was reported in the New York Times. I believe it was reported by Paul P. Haney, the NASA spokesman. He basically said they had videotape of the fire, and as I said, that Gary Props fellow was watching it, and he maintained that at least 3 minutes went by from the first mention of fire to when the flames covered up the windows, and he said he could clearly see them through the window trying to get out. Okay, and he was yelling, "Blow the hatch! Why don't they blow the hatch?" Again, he didn't realize that the hatch could not be jettisoned explosively. And NASA, they clearly said they had this video footage. Mark Gray is now claiming that the footage doesn't exist. Now, personally, obviously, that's not something I really.
This is what's in my book. This is what's in my book that's not in the film. I interviewed Betty Grissom for 4 hours. She told me on January 26, 1927, her husband came home from work and said the following: "Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad inspecting the equipment. The very next day, he's dead from faulty equipment." It's her opinion. It's her son's opinion, who's a 747 pilot, that the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, who wouldn't cooperate with the fraud, was murdered by the CIA.
Wow.
So and that's their opinion, right? And they have more evidence than I do.
And we discovered, and that's part of what we're here tonight, that for some reason the CIA was looking into space travel. And space travel, radiation, the Van Allen belts, all of it. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But before we do that, thanks to everybody joining us tonight from all around the world. We've got Bart Sibrel with us. We've got Jarrah White with us. And Smitty, you had a question real quick for both of them?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, how much does it speak to the moon landing being faked that no other country has actually gone to the moon, and the technology that almost every country on the face of the planet has now is better than the technology we had in 1969?
Well, it's the only time in the history of the world that a technological breakthrough couldn't be repeated 50 years later. Like I said, Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, so you got to imagine 57 years later, right, which would be 1982, that instead of being able to fly 3,000 miles, the greatest airplane on Earth can only fly 3 miles. How can you only travel 1,000th as far with 57 years better technology? You cannot have greater technology in the past and in the future. There's no device, no electronic device, no microwave, cell phone, computer that is better in 1969 than today. And then they admit they destroyed the technology. I mean, come on. If you were ever going to destroy any technology, maybe the atomic bomb after you used it. But just 10 years later, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more explosive. So if you could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. But it can't be done. You cannot have greater technology in the past. The truth is right there for all to see. It's like this is Santa Claus for adults. They don't want to give it up.
Yeah, and Jarrah, maybe you can speak on the physics of this, because one of the things I thought is really, to me, it was telling in terms of how I view the moon landings, and that is we had this tremendous tragedy recently where a group was trying to get down to the Titanic to view it. And there's a couple of incredible documentaries out there. They even invited at one time Josh Gates from Expedition Unknown on A&E, I believe. They were going to take him down there. And he did some pre-dives on that, and they were like, no, we can't do that. But Jarrah, what's your take on the physics? Like we can't hardly even get to the Titanic, but yet in 1969 we went to the moon and back.
Well, getting to the Titanic is a little bit different than getting into space, because in one case, in the case of reaching the Titanic, you got an outside pressure, the water pressure, that's basically threatening to crush you. So you want to have very, very strong walls that will push against the outside pressure, make sure it doesn't get crushed on you. Whereas in space, it's the exact opposite. You want to maintain the pressure that's inside, because there's no air outside. That means there's no pressure outside. So you want to make sure the cabin pressure inside is contained. But of course, trying to get to the moon would require not only do you need a big rocket to get there, you also need a huge rocket to lift the necessary shielding that would be required to protect you from the radiation, so you don't get hurt. And people always like to say, "Oh, well, it's too expensive. We've been there before. We've done that." Well, here's the thing: there have been many various proposals using existing technology, which they never end up using. Like, for example, there was the Soviets. They had the Zonda program, which was basically where they send a Soyuz around the moon and back. They did several of those launches. Interestingly enough, the Zonda 5, it was initially thought to be manned because it transmitted human voices of the cosmonauts back. People thought it was manned, but in reality, the cosmonauts were actually at the tracking station in Crimea, sending their voices to the spacecraft, which in turn acted as a repeater, which that in itself is a proof of concept as to how you would go about faking a mission to the moon, such that people on the receiving end would be fooled. Now, that spacecraft carried a biological payload of turtles, bacteria, and insects. People like to say that, oh, well, that's proof that humans can survive. Well, no, because turtles can take huge amounts of radiation. These life forms, they're what we call extremophiles. An extremophile is a life form that can thrive in environments or conditions that are too extreme for humans to survive in. In the case of reptiles and insects, they can harmlessly absorb huge amounts of radiation. Not just these insects and these reptiles. They also put a spiderwort plant on there. You know what the pet name for a spiderwort plant is?
What's that?
The living Geiger counter. They call it a living Geiger counter because you expose it to huge amounts of radiation that would be lethal to humans. Its segments simply change color. That's it. No adverse effects or anything like that. But anyways, Soviets, you would think that if they were confident, they would have manned the Zond capsule. They never did. Later on in the 90s, there were proposals to have the space shuttle carry a Apollo capsule derived lunar lander. Basically, instead of the Apollo lunar lander as we know it, they would have the command module with landing legs attached. That would be carried in the shuttle bay, launched into Earth orbit. Then a Ariane 5 rocket or a Titan rocket would carry up a Centaur rocket to dock in Earth orbit, send it out to the moon, right? To basically a Earth orbit rendezvous approach. They never did it. There's been all these different proposed. Now, then there's also been proposals to have tourist missions to the moon with Soyuz. Again, never got off the ground. You would think that if they had this technology, right, they think, oh, we destroyed it. And other times they say, oh, why don't we use this technology? No, they never do it. And I would like to mention as well just a couple of things. I mentioned the Apollo 1 flights. Before we move on to the next topic, I'll just bring this up real quick and then we can move on. As I said before, the footage of the Apollo 1 flight was not something I wanted to see, obviously, but it's one of those things where you kind of need closure, you need to see it to understand what really happened that day, because there was reports. NASA initially, they reported that only the skeletons of the astronauts remained, and they claimed that, oh no, they died of smoke inhalation. And I've seen the photos that was left of the spacesuits. It's not pretty, to say the least. There's another thing as well about this door. This is a book here by Kennan and Harvey. These were researchers. These were space journalists. They wrote the book Mission to the Moon in 1969. They mention here that this was the first and only use of a new three-piece spacecraft hatch. It had never been used before. And I got another passage here by Gordon Cooper, who was one of the astronauts here. This is his book, Leap of Faith. He writes, another piece of bad luck for Apollo 1. Its hatch took 14 different turns and other procedures to open up. In such an emergency, it was practically unusable. A new hatch had already been redesigned for greater safety, and this was to have been the last time the old hatch was used. As soon as Apollo 1 went into its final rehab for its upcoming mission, the old hatch was scheduled to be replaced with a newer hatch, which could be opened in 20 seconds. The new hatch, which the Apollo 1 crew would have flown to space with, probably would have saved Ed, Gus, and Roger. So first of all, he says, oh, this was the last time they used it. It was also the first time they were going to use it, which it beggars belief. Why wouldn't you just wait until this new hatch was installed before you even thought about putting humans in there? Especially if you were, it just doesn't add up. As I said before, usually you'd want to have the pressure test and the plugs out test, which is what they were doing. They would want to do those separately. The plugs out test is basically where you make sure all the umbilicals are unplugged to make sure the spacecraft can operate under its own power, right? And as I said, the pressure test is where you simply fill up the pressure inside the cabin and make sure it can handle that kind of internal pressure. But they decided to do it together. And
well, keep in mind, too, Jarrah, it wasn't an accident. It was an assassination.
I know. And obviously, that's the point. That's the point. And
so they intentionally did all these things. The pressurization of oxygen at, double 2 atmospheres when they knew it would cause a fire. The fact that Gus Grissom, the primary target, under his seat, they found rags soaked in oil. I mean, come on, who would even do that?
They also tried to blame them for some of the flammable stuff that was in there. There was one thing that was they had Velcro, which was basically to keep things from floating away. But Grissom, he was actually during the acceptance test of the spacecraft. This was a few months before the fire. He was complaining that there was too much Velcro and too much other stuff in the spacecraft. And Joe Shea, he was saying, "Oh, the manager." He says, "Well, go." He tells North American to go remove it. They never removed it. Supposedly, he told him that. But interestingly enough, after the fire, they said the astronauts themselves put the Velcro in there. Which that in itself, why would you? If he was concerned about the Velcro, why would he be plastering the stuff all over the walls of the spacecraft? It's like There's a comedy series I used to watch back in the 80s and the 90s. It's The Young Ones, right? Where the guy Rick Mail's character, he has a line when he's either going to be ratted out. He says, "It was the other three, not me. I had no idea what was going on. It really was the other three." That's literally what we're seeing with NASA, North American Aviation, trying to pin the blame for the Velcro and other flammable stuff on the astronauts themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's all good points there, Jarrah. I've got to go in a little bit. I sent in the chat like a 4-minute clip to show. It's called the Deathbed Confession. There's the link, and you can start at 3:36 and play it through 7:28. This is one of the book clips that I have at Sibrel.com. Basically, the 4 proofs we have the shadows intersecting at 90 degrees, which proves it's electrical light, which means they didn't go to the moon. We have this footage that shows them faking being halfway to the moon. We have the logic that you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 than today, where they can only go 1,000th the distance to the moon with an astronaut. And you have an eyewitness who, as he was dying, confessed to participating in the moon landing fraud. If you want to cue that up, bring up the audio, make it full screen. It's called the Deathbed Confession. It's on the homepage of Sibrel.com, and you just decide for yourself, is this guy telling the truth or not? Look into his eyes, right? Look at his body language. And sure enough, I verified all this stuff. His father was chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base. He saw them faking the moon landing. I did not put it in the book, but he actually committed a homicide of a coworker to cover up the moon landing fraud. And he was given by President Johnson a list of 15 VIPs who are allowed in. He saved that as a souvenir. We publish it in the book. And you watch this testimony. See for yourself. Is this guy lying, or are these government agents known as Apollo astronauts, are they lying? Right? One of the two is true, right? So this is called the Deathbed Confession. You might want to bring up the audio full screen. It's that link in the chat, or it's on the homepage of Sibrel.com, and start at 3:36 and play it through about 7:28. And this will be the 4th proof. An eyewitness. An eyewitness saw them fake it at Cannon Air Force Base. Bill Casing, as you know, Jarrah, said the United States Air Force was who supervised the moon landing fraud. And it was shot at their #1 most secure base, their special operations, Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. The person you'll see is the son of the man who committed a homicide to cover up the moon landing fraud. And he said, I lived right across from the base. My dad was chief of security there. You can scroll down. It's one of the last ones there. These are all interactive book links. There it is, the one with the picture of the person in the military hat to the right there. There you go. And then cue it up to about 3:36 in the video and play it through 7:28. And next to it is the Moon Man song, if you want to play that at the, on your way out.
3:36. All right, here we go.
This man was visited by men in black about 3 years ago and threatened with death if he ever spoke to me again about his father's participation in the moon landing fraud. His dad was the chief of security at the United States Air Force's most secure base, their Special Operations Intelligence Division, and that's where they filmed the first moon landing fraud. And you're going to see, as his father was dying, he told his son exactly what he had burdened all these years, that he murdered somebody to cover it up, and that he eyewitnessed them fake the moon landing at his Air Force base 1 year earlier on videotape.
Wow. Who is this again, Bart?
This is Cyrus Eugene Akers, is the man who saw them film the moon landing at Cannon Air Force Base, who confessed to killing a coworker. And you'll see his son was there as his father was dying. And his father told him that he had to, get right with God, that he was a murderer. And the military police came in and investigated. They said, "Who did you kill?" He said, "A coworker at Cannon Air Force Base." And then they asked, "Why did you kill him?" And he said, "Well, he was going to squeal about the fake moon landing, which we both eyewitnessed being filmed at our Air Force Base June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. So I killed him to keep it a secret." President Johnson showed up the first of 3 days of filming and gave this man a list of 15 people who were allowed in to eyewitness. Neil Armstrong is on the list. Buzz Aldrin is on the list. Half the people I knew and half the people I didn't know. They were CIA, NSA, and one science fiction writer, Robert Emenegger, was on the list, who, by the way, spent his whole life saying the moon landings are real and aliens are real.
Yeah.
So, are you having problem bringing that up, or?
Oh, let me get it started back again.
Okay.
It's a very powerful 3 minutes there.
What's that all about? So anyway, he said that in front of the airplane hangars was pole framing with large canvas tents that was concealing the inside of the staging area. Inside the staging area, on flatbed trucks, was uncrated the lunar lander that was reassembled back inside the hangars. All of the walls were painted flat black, and the ceilings as well. He was sworn to secrecy by the NSA, and they would put him in prison for breaking that oath. When Dad saw the moon landing on TV, he cried. He said he knew that what he had witnessed on TV was exactly what they recorded in that hangar. There was no reason for them to go flying around and everything. They had detailed high-definition photos of the landing area. There was no reason for them to go flying around to a different landing area that almost exhausted their fuel, except for drama, because everything had gone so smoothly. Nothing, so it had to be something. Anyway, Dad was one of 3 guards that guarded the inside of the front entrance. There was a list of 15 people who could enter. No one else was allowed by order of President Johnson. And here is that list. And I gave it to Bart Sibrel as well. And he checked out a lot of these names, and he says he can verify a lot of these people and what they do. And I come across a couple myself. Anyway, President Johnson, Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, Werner von Braun, Robert Emenegger, Gene Kranz, James Webb, Joe Kerwin, Dr. Thomas Paine, Glenn Looney, Dr. Christopher Kraft, Dr. James Van Allen.
I'm going to pause that right there, and we can find that. It's called Deathbed Confession on Sibrel.
Yeah, that's just a segment of it. The whole thing is about 2 or 3 times longer. And, I calculate, I think I get about 5,000 emails a year. Right now, I'm backed up on about 1,100 emails, but I go through where I, just take off 2 weeks and go through them all. And you can imagine, since I think I did Coast to Coast 4 times. And the first time we did it right when the film came out, it got so many views. I think it outsold, what was that? Gladiator, the Academy Award winning film for one day. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon, outsold Gladiator for one day after I did Coast to Coast. And in one day, I got 2,000 emails. Now, what's interesting is prior to about 7 years ago, 90% of all those 5,000 emails a year I get were, how dare you say the moon landings are fake. Some even said they wish they could watch me and my family burn alive before their eyes.
Oh, geez.
You understand, when someone is foaming at the mouth to that degree, that only proves me right, because it shows that they're not thinking clearly and therefore cannot discern the truth about it. And then about 7 years ago, a paradigm shift, 90% or more, or about how, thank you for opening my eyes. I can't believe I believed it for this long. I had to do the same thing. The people who want to debate me, whether we went to the moon or not, they're not open-minded. They're like that college professor who said if Neil Armstrong confessed on national TV, they still think he walked on the moon anyway. I proved I was open-minded. I went from worshiping the moon landings to being suspicious to doubting, and then seeing that footage of them faking it right in front of your eyes, saying, I guess they faked it. How sad is that?
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about these emails is I get these clues, I have this great evidence, contact me. And 99.99% of the time, it's not that great of evidence, or I've already heard about it or whatever. However, I originally turned down this project back in, I guess, 1988. Bill Casing suggested I do a film about it, and I turned it down because I looked into it and the shadows intersecting and no one can repeat it. And I'm like, something doesn't seem right. And if I start overturning these rocks, it could be dangerous. And I want to have a wife and family. I'm not going to risk my life for what Nixon did. No, thank you. But when it dawned on me that there is good versus evil, there is light versus darkness, truth versus lies, and that the faking of the moon landing is more profound than if they'd actually gone, I changed my mind. Because I love puzzles, and I will turn over 1,000,000 rocks to find one clue if that's what it takes. So right before I published my book, I got an email from this guy you just saw on camera saying, hey, I have this great, breakthrough information. I'm like, yada, yada, yada. I'll get to it eventually. And so 3 months later, I call him up and he says, my father was there where they filmed it. He told me so as he was dying. Wow. And I'm like, oh my gosh, just in time to get into the book. So he gave me these lists of the 15 people. And if you've read my book, Moon Man, it's audio, Kindle, or print, I go into this kind of bizarre espionage X-Files encounter that I had with government agents at the back door of CNN, where I was trying to get the tape to a friend of mine who worked there, surrounded by government agents, kidnapped, drugged with tooth serum to the point of vomiting. And I escaped. I made my way back to Nashville, and then I peed in a cup. And I said, I got him. I got proof I was drugged. And I called up the news director at NBC and said, we got him. So I had a friend put it in a lab in his name. And when I checked back with him, I'm like, what's the lab result? We got him. He says, well, there was a problem. And I'm like, what? He says, well, there was a break-in at the lab over the weekend. And I'm like, so what? He says, well, it's a funny thing. The only thing stolen was your urine sample. And the people were like, we don't know who you are, but please take your business elsewhere. So in the course of this adventures, I met 2 people who were government agents, but good government agents trying to protect me. And I stay in touch with them from time to time through various ways. And when I got this list of the 15 people, they asked me to call 2 people on the list and tell them that I had the list. This is before the book was published. And I'm like, oh, you want me to slit my throat? Is that what you want me to do? And I was afraid. I was very afraid to do that. They said, have we ever let you down? We have your back. So I called one of them, and I don't remember who it was. It was some person I'd never heard of. But the other one was Eugene Krantz. And they gave me his number. I called him up. And apparently it was at a time where he was supposed to be having some secret telecommunication conference. And I call up, and you don't hear a hello. And then it's a click. I call up again. I say, Gene. He says, yeah. And he says, is this about the satellite conference with Cernan? He thought there was some tech support issue with his private high-end satellite scrambled thing he had in his house in retirement. He thought I was the tech support guy saying, reset it or whatever. Is this about the satellite call with Cernan? Well, Cernan has to be Eugene Cernan, who allegedly died a couple of years earlier, to not have to deal with the 50th anniversary stuff. So
right.
I told him and this other person that I have you on a document as having visited Cannon Air Force Base in 1968 to witness the fake moon landing. What have you got to say for yourself? And so the point is, like 2 days later, my guy who you saw in the video, his house was broken into when he was shopping. He had all these video surveillance cameras and everything, a password completely disabled. And everything about his father was scrubbed. You call the United States Air Force and ask for Cyrus Eugene Akers through a Freedom of Information Act. They said he was never in the Air Force. And yet I just filmed him, and Jarrah sent me the picture of his tombstone, United States Air Force, right there in the cemetery. And then a couple of days after that, my source was visited face to face. This is like 3 years ago, and threatened that they would kill him and his family if he ever talked to me again about the moon landing fraud. The FBI was involved. The United States Senate Intelligence Committee was involved, and the White House press office to give this guy whistleblower protection. And that's the guy in the video you just saw. Now, I already knew that the moon missions were fake. I talk about this in my book. The moment I put in the tape and I'm looking at that window and I'm like, that's not the window. No, that's not the window. No. And then the lights come up and it's the window. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they really faked it. But when you hear from somebody, my dad was there when they filmed it at Cannon Air Force Base, and I was threatened with death a few days ago to talk about it. Well, what can you do? This is the world that we live in. And it's like cancer. If you had cancer, would you want to know? And the reason why I changed my mind from not doing it for fear it could be dangerous, I'm going to die anyway. Everybody is going to die anyway. And our founding fathers and mothers stood up against the British tyranny after only 5 people died. Well, Jarrah's right. We have Barron, we have the 3 Apollo astronauts, we have the guy who Cyrus Eugene Akers killed, and several other Apollo astronauts on backup crews. When are people going to stand up? The faking of the moon landing is this cancer that we don't know about. And it is the one thing that would outrage the public the most if they knew about. They say 200 people were killed to keep the JFK assassination quiet. This involved fewer deaths.
Yeah.
But it's burned in people's hearts. Putting a man on the moon, how glorious.
Oh, yeah.
If you show them the truth about that, maybe the NBC News director was correct. It would cause a civil war against the federal government, and so be it, because the federal government is at large faking moon landings and doing who knows what else. So the moon landing truth is the best way to bring that corruption to an end.
Yep. And, speaking of the JFK situation. We had part of why we contacted Bart and Jarrah was because of something we found in the JFK files and All Things Unexplained. We've taken some deep dives into the UFO files and the JFK files, and we want to be respectful of y'all's time. So we'll get through this real quick, and then if y'all would be so kind as to answer a couple of listener questions for y'all. We've got a lot of listeners who would love to ask you a couple of things. But this is JFK file, Bart and Jarrah, number 104-10413-10306. So you can Google this JFK file number and pull it up for yourselves. And it involves a very interesting story about a Russian scientist named Yuri Moskaloff. And one of the keys here is they think he had radiation poisoning. So he was destined to die quite soon at some point. And the CIA had a couple of theories about him. And essentially the CIA thought this could be the guy that actually shot JFK. And also, this was a Russian scientist who traveled to international conferences. And there was one conference in particular, and this was the key part of this file, where the CIA interviewed U.S. scientists that were at the conference, the symposium, in October 1963. So several years before Apollo. Interestingly, this interview was in 64. It was supposed to be 10 pages, but pages 3, 4, 8, 9, and 10 are actually missing from the interview between the CIA and the U.S. scientist. And there were some really interesting questions in here about radiation and some other things. Like this one here, they talk about thermonuclear reactions solely without the use of fissionable materials, which would produce large amounts of energy on the order of 1 kiloton or greater. And Jarrah, just chime in if any of this rings a bell. I think you'll find some of this very interesting. Here on the second question, was anything presented on effects of space radiation on the human body? And the scientist said, I can recall no Soviet references to the Vostok.
Yeah, the Vostok was the Russian equivalent of the Mercury capsule. This is the one that Gagarin was supposed to fly, and it's interesting to note that I find the timing of this quite interesting because around just a few months prior to this conference, the British astronomer Sir Bernard Lovell, he had actually visited the Soviet Union. He was shown all the space technology, was shown the observatories, they were shown everything. And they had basically told him that they were postponing manned moon missions indefinitely because they could not see any way to protect their cosmonauts from the radiation from solar flares. And he basically reiterated those concerns in a letter to the deputy administrator of NASA at the time. And it's important to note that the Vostok capsule has had much more shielding than the Apollo capsule. That's of course is because I mentioned earlier how the Apollo spacecraft, they only flew with a low pressure pure oxygen atmosphere. It was supposed to be about 5 psi in orbit, but whereas the Soviets, they had always been flying with a sea level nitrogen oxygen atmosphere, which means they needed stronger walls to contain this sea level pressure atmosphere. So already they've got some additional shielding over the Apollo capsules and over the Mercury and Gemini capsules that the Americans were building or flying at the time. So I find that very telling that they were interested in asking if there was any information leaked about this, about the radiation from the Vostok flights.
Yeah, and again, this, folks, is in the JFK files, okay? They wanted to know about drugs in radiation protection, and they wanted to know, they asked several times about biological indicators at low ranges of radiation doses, and this seemed to kind of cause some back and forth between the scientists and the CIA. Jarrah, like, what's the modern take on biological indicators and radiation? And humans, especially.
Well, to kill a human, it's generally stated that you need several hundreds of rem to kill a human. That's the unit of radiation, the Roentgen equivalent in man. Okay, and it's very important to distinguish the different terminologies that are using and stuff. You've got your absorbed doses, you've got your equivalent doses, you've got your effective doses, and they had what was it called? The radiation, I got my notes written down here, actually, matter of fact.
The RBE?
Yeah, the RBE. What that basically is, that's the amount of an absorbed dose, the absorbed dose of a type of radiation divided by the absorbed dose of a different type of radiation that would produce the same effects. You see, and so basically what that is we use each different type of radiation will affect you differently. Like, in fact, we have to convert from absorbed dose to the equivalent dose. Each radiation has its own radiation weight factor, which is basically a number that we multiply the absorbed dose by to determine, okay, here's how much REM we would get. Okay, like if you're exposed to electrons or X-rays or gamma rays, and the radiation weight factor is just 1, so the absorbed dose is the same as the equivalent dose, just the units changed, obviously. But if you're dealing with things like protons or neutrons, then they will be much higher. For a proton, the radiation weight factor is 5. So you simply multiply the absorbed dose by 5, and you convert. That's conversion to rad. So like one rad of protons would be equivalent to 1 rad. Of course, rad is what we use for absorbed dose. 1 rad of protons would be 5 rem of protons. Okay. And similarly with neutrons, it's much higher. It ranges between 5 to 20, the radiation weight factor, depending on the energy of those neutrons. So one must be quite cautious in. You see, when you're reading through these papers on radiation, you'll see various units cited. You'll see grays, you'll see rads, you'll see sieverts, you'll see rem. It's very important to keep in mind. Okay, this means absorbed dose. This means equivalent dose, and you just
right
using
and practice. One thing that became quite apparent while reviewing this document is that the Russians clearly were doing some extreme experiments, especially with large animals and radiation for some reason. Of course, we can only speculate. Guys, these next 2 questions left me flabbergasted when I saw that the CIA in the JFK files asked these U.S. scientists, were results presented on cosmic and Van Allen belt radiation effects on, there was a word there, but I couldn't decipher it, organisms in such areas as lethal, metabolic, developmental, and genetic. And then they asked them, did the Soviets say anything bearing on physical measurements of radiation in space in terms of relative biological effectiveness factor, that's that RBE factor, and implications for future manned space flights? This clearly is applicable to what we're talking about tonight. What's your take on this?
Again, it boils back to that the fact that the Soviets, they had better shielding than the Americans were using, because they could contain a sea level pressure atmosphere. So obviously, the Americans would want to know what kind of radiation effects they would have on living organisms exposed to this kind of radiation. And of course, this was written interviewed in 1964. About 4 years after that, they had the Zond 5 thing, as I mentioned, which sent turtles and various other radiation-resistant life forms around the moon. It's almost like the Russians specifically chose life forms that they knew would be very hardy against this kind of radiation to ensure, hey, we sent the first living organisms around the moon. It's like they guaranteed. Usually when they would send up their biological payloads, they would use dogs. Remember Laika, which obviously didn't make it back, and there was a few other dogs that they did manage to get back. I forget their names right now, but that you would think, okay, we'll send life forms around the moon, we'll use dogs. No, this time they changed their tune, they changed their routine. Why? They specifically chose life forms that they knew could handle this kind of radiation. And presumably they might have been doing some studies, in the years leading up to them, exposing, okay, here we'll expose this dog to X amount of radiation, we'll expose this cat, we'll expose this any kinds of animals, they find, okay, these ones will handle it, let's send them. That's what I think was probably building up to this. But the fact that the CIA was trying to find out information about this demonstrates that, okay, we needed this information to try to shield the astronauts. We want to shield our astronauts, make sure they can survive this kind of radiation. Obviously, that's never got round. The problem,
if I may interject, let's remind people listening what radiation we're talking about. And I know I'm being kind of general on the mileage, but about 1,000 miles above the Earth. and extending 30,000 miles beyond that is what's called the Van Allen radiation belt. It protects all life on Earth from cosmic and galactic radiation. Without it, we wouldn't be holding this conversation. And every manned mission, except the Apollo missions, has been well below it, generally 700 miles below the beginning of the radiation. Now, if you go to Sibrel.com and scroll near the bottom, there's an article that says radiation belts prevent travel to the moon. Here's an article. I think Jarrah was the one who discovered this from Scientific American magazine. Our measurements show. Yeah, I'm gonna read it here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it said this is when they sent Geiger counters into the radiation belts in 1958. They obviously knew this was the obstacle to leaving Earth orbit. The Geiger counters broke because they vibrated so much. It says our measurements show that the maximum radiation level as of 1958 is equivalent to between 10 and 100 roentgens per hour, right? So the average of that is about 55, depending on the still undetermined proportions of protons to electrons. Since a human being exposed for 2 days to even 10 roentgens, which is 1/5 the average level, will have only an even chance of survival, meaning they will die half of the time. It says the radiation belts obviously present an obstacle to space flight. Now, if you go to the chat that I just put in, there's a link in the chat there. Go up to where I posted something. We're going to have NASA's latest engineer, Kelly Smith, talk about the radiation belt, which most people don't know of. Again, we just read that 1/5 of the level that there is will kill you half the time. Okay, so it's already like 10 times the level.
Sounds like low odds.
That would kill you. So if you go to link number 10,
astronautical engineering and science,
NASA admits fraud, right? And that's of course an indirect, but they mention it here, and I think I put the time code in the note here. Go to 228 on Moonman book clip. I think it's clip number 10, Moonman number 10.
While you're getting that clip, I would like to bring this up here. I have this book here. This is Astronautical Engineering and Science, which was written in 1963. There's a section in here published by J. Warren Keller and various other scientists. Here it's called Problems in Radiation Shielding of Space Vehicles. Again, this is from 1963. And they write here specifically, they're talking about the Van Allen radiation belt, the inner proton belt, the heart of it. They say here, the resulting shield thickness seemed to be quite formidable, with approximately 100 grams per square centimeter needed to reduce the total dose rate down to approximately 1 Roentgen per hour. Consequently, due to the very large shield penalty involved, the intense regions of the inner zone belt will probably be a forbidden region for manned orbiting vehicles. Okay, and just to put that shielding into perspective, 100 grams per square centimeter shielding, that's equivalent to a meter of water. It's equivalent to a meter of water. So they're basically saying we need a meter of shielding to keep the astronaut, bring it down to safe levels in the radiation belts.
Yeah, and, that's it exactly, Jarrah. So let's look at, I posted the clip in the chat one more time. There's a link. Just click on the link and then go to, what is the time? 2:29. You're going to hear NASA's own engineer, a guy in his late 20s at the time, Kelly Smith, talk about the radiation. And you're going to hear an admission indirectly that the moon landings were fake, because he's going to say the radiation surrounding the Earth is dangerous, meaning deadly, and the technology necessary to go through it to the moon and back has not been invented yet. He says we must solve these challenges, radiation challenges, before we send people through this region of space. Every manned mission, Skylab, Gemini, Mercury, the space shuttle, the space station, is below the radiation, except going to the moon. He says we must solve these radiation challenges before we send people through this region of space, meaning the challenges have not yet been resolved. meaning the technology to go through the radiation to the moon and survive has not been invented yet.
And that's clearly applicable.
How did they go to the moon?
Right, and that's clearly applicable to this file that we've discovered here in the JFK files. And this would probably be a good time to pull up a question from listener Christian Carroll, who wanted to know, are there points in the Van Allen belts that are weaker?
They tend to thin out towards the poles. Ideally is that you would want to launch, in fact, it actually is mentioned in the Scientific American article that Van Allen actually suggested we should launch through the polar region. The idea of that is you would want to launch your spacecraft into a polar orbit and then fire the engine such that it'll launch through the radiation-free zone of the poles. He actually called them the cones of escape. But obviously you couldn't do that with the Saturn V, not from Florida anyways, because you would need to alter your orbit bit by bit before you get into a polar orbit. And to launch it from, they usually launch their polar orbit spacecraft from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. That's, of course, is because straight down there's nothing but ocean. So if anything goes wrong, the rocket will fall into the ocean. But they launch much smaller rockets, stuff about the size of the shuttle, the Titan rockets and things like that. But, they would need to completely redesign the entire launch facility just to get it there. And plus, if I recall correctly, the Saturn rockets were built on the eastern coast, so they wouldn't be possible to ship them, via rail to Vandenberg. So you'd have to. It's now a whole kettle of fish in its own right. And I actually did the calculations. I actually looked up the coordinates that have been attributed to Apollo 11. There was a fellow who I mentioned earlier, these propagandists who constantly misrepresent everything. There's this one propagandist. He goes by the name of Robert Brandig. He published a section on his website basically trying to prove, I say in quotation marks, prove that the astronauts could have survived the radiation. He was getting the coordinates that have been attributed to Apollo 11, and he plugged them into the AP8. The AP8 is the industry standard model for the Van Allen protons. Okay, so you plug in these coordinates, it'll give you, okay, there's this many protons per square centimeter per second, okay, this energy. And so the idea is you would take these coordinates, get your flux, your intensity of the radiation for each energy level, and basically do the calculations to work out how much radiation would have been deposited in the astronaut. But reading through his paper, he was desperately trying to downplay the amount of radiation the astronaut should have received. He was claiming that anything below 100 mega electron volts would be stopped in the shielding, and anything greater than 100 mega electron volts would go straight through the astronauts. Well, tell that to people who work in proton therapy. In proton therapy, they accelerate the protons to a certain energy level, and they fire it through a little pencil beam. The idea is they would target a tumor, right? And they would only accelerate the protons such that it would only penetrate as far as the tumor. The thing about protons is that they have what's called the Bragg peak, where they lose all their energy at the very deepest part they can reach. Okay, and you can look it up. They accelerate protons in proton therapy to about 200 or 250 mega electron volts. It's in that range. Okay, so the idea that anything greater than 100 will go straight through the astronauts and do little damage, that's ludicrous. Okay, so I did the calculations, and I find that the Apollo astronauts, they would have received up to 100 rem of radiation. That's life-threatening.
Right.
It's life-threatening. Okay?
Yeah, definitely. and that's what the report says. It says here that the average, our average equivalent is between 10 and 100 per hour, right? And that 1/5 of that would kill you half of the time. I would just if you can, go to that clip that I put in the chat, go to 229, and you'll hear NASA themselves. You see, there are people there who either know the moon missions are fake or who just assume that they're real and put out contradictory information sometimes. And this is the radiation specialist. Yeah. He's talking about sending Geiger counters into the radiation belt in order to measure the radiation. Well, why would they need to do that if they went to the moon 6 times and 2 other times through the belts and lived to be 90, right?
There's another thing about that as well.
In their 90, so there must be virtually no radiation that's lethal at all. So why would they send a mission? One of the first missions is Orion, to send an unmanned probe right in the middle of the radiation belt with 2 Geiger counters and then come back.
It should be
why would
noted
they
as
need
well.
What do you have on that,
nuclear
Jarrah?
hints?
I just wanted to add here, the Orion spacecraft, it's already has about 3 times as much shielding as the Apollo spacecraft. The Apollo spacecraft was rated at about 7 to 8 grams per square centimeter of shielding, okay, whereas the Orion spacecraft is about 20 grams per square centimeter of shielding. And as we saw in this book here, you need about 100 grams per square centimeter just to bring it down to safe levels. Now, it's very important. This is really a clincher here. I should have mentioned this earlier. As I said before, they're talking here about the heart of the inner Van Allen belt. Right? NASA, they like to claim, oh, the Apollo astronauts, they avoided the heart. Well, with Apollo 14, they tell us a different story. They say Apollo 14 received the highest doses of any astronauts. They still only report about 1.14 rads for the skin. Okay, the skin only represents a small percentage of the overall dose. It only represents a percentage of it. Okay, they never reported on the body, right? But they attribute it being higher than the other missions because it traveled through the heart of the radiation belt. That's literally what it says in the Apollo 14 mission report. Well, hang on a second. A minute ago, you're saying these guys managed to survive because they avoided the heart. Now you're telling us that the Apollo 14 astronauts, they went through the heart and they got to somewhat higher radiation dose. Well, which is it? And since they didn't have 100 grams per square centimeter of shielding, they didn't have a meter of water around them, how did they bring it down to safe levels?
And that's so interesting to me. You know, Bart, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties with the tab sharing, but I'll put those links in the show description so that everybody can follow them to what you're talking about. But it's so interesting, Jerry, you mentioned that because this interview with the U.S. scientist is in the JFK files is chock full of things about radiation. And one of the sad parts to me about this is who are the CIA agents doing the interview? We have no idea, but they clearly have some sort of specialized background, right? Like, I just feel like they couldn't be doing this interview on these topics and just be your run-of-the-mill CIA field agents. At least that's my impression. I don't think they could, but we have no idea who the CIA agents were. And then we've got all these missing pages. And they ask a very interesting thing here, Jarrah, and I've talked to a lot of people that have found this to be really interesting, really disturbing. Was anything reported on effects of radiation on non-regenerative tissues such as the brain? They ask these U.S. scientists this. What's your take on that?
Well, obviously the brain is the most essential part of the body. As a kid, I used to call it the boss of the body because that's the central nervous system. It gives us all our bodily functions, our involuntary functions, our voluntary functions and stuff. That's why we live, you know. And so if you get radiation affected in the brain, and that's you're pretty much as good as dead, really, because that's irreversible damage in the long run. But again, they were trying to find out what kind of effects of radiation, what kind of shielding preventions they were doing, and then one of the things that they mentioned in there as well. I'm not sure if you mentioned this earlier, but they mentioned, were there any attempts to try and find any medical treatments, any pills or something like that? They voiced that they had very little confidence in that regard. There's one example. There are treatments. There are treatments, I will say, for radiation exposure, but they have varying degrees of success. The one that stands out in my mind is if you have radioactive iodine in the throat. Okay, then one treatment for that would be potassium iodine. You know, they would give you potassium iodine. You wouldn't want to have that in normal circumstances because that itself can be very toxic. But it only works on that type of radiation exposure from the radioactive iodine. It doesn't work on other types of radiation exposure. So I remember back in the day, there used to be some people claiming, they would just take their yellow pills and they'd be fine. Well, the radiation medical treatment doesn't quite work like that. It's varying degrees of success and various use cases. So
right. Well, you know what's terribly interesting to me is in 1964, this interview with U.S. scientists was happening with the CIA, and the CIA was wondering all this stuff about radiation and the Van Allen belts. And then this past week, we had a UAP hearing in front of Congress, and we had a very interesting question from one of our lawmakers in 2025, so nearly 60 years later. And I think that this should make Bart quite proud here that this question was asked. But we had this question asked at the UAP
but a
hearing.
misrepresentation because we do have things. But making that statement is not technically a lie. It's a misrepresentation of the full truth.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I, just since we're on that topic real quick, how do we get to these other planets? How do we pass the Van Allen radiation belt safely?
Good question for you. I cannot answer that for you.
So the
Really?
CIA,
You use the
1964, they want to know the
get
same
to the
thing as they
radiation
know.
belt.
They still want to know. Bart, what's your take on
use
that?
the Apollo equipment to get through the belt. You just dig it up. You
Oh,
know,
yeah,
right?
that's all we need.
You got someone to explain.
Except they destroyed it. I mean, this is one of the most remarkable things. One of my book links at Sibrel.com is NASA astronaut Don Petty saying that they deliberately destroyed the technology. Now, maybe you could do that with the atomic bomb, but why would you spend an equivalent of $250 billion and then throw it all in a furnace? You would never do that if you really went to the moon, but that's exactly what you would do if you perpetrated a fraud. So the guy says we don't know how to go through the radiation belt. Isn't that saying they didn't go to the moon? I mean, right there. I don't know what to say.
It's funny that you should mention destroying the technology. I was actually reading Leap of Faith earlier by Gordon Cooper. He mentions there how they would not just destroy the rockets, they also destroyed the assembly lines that were necessary to build the Saturn V rockets and the various other components of the spacecraft, everything. And it's all.
And the telemetry data as to where the rocket was, and the original videotapes right before Ron Howard wanted to project it at 4 times the resolution in IMAX. They destroyed it all, which you would never do if you went, and that's exactly what you do if you perpetrated a fraud. So there you go. I don't know what to say. I've got to run, but thank you for having me on. And if you want to look at more information, I have my book about the moon landing fraud, the backstory, my interview with Betty Grissom, and then, of course, the alien kind of, I don't know, what do you call it, controversy, where there's, half-truths and partial truths about what's going on, and all that you can see at Sibrel.com.
Thanks so much, Bart. We really appreciate you. Jarrah, would you be up for a couple of listener questions real quick?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer the questions they have for me.
Great. Bart, thank you so much. If you want to stick around for a couple listener questions, we welcome it. If you can't do it, we hope to have you back on the show sometime soon. This question is for whoever can answer. This comes from a friend of the show, Pix. Okay, so if we accept the premise being made here, what is the ultimate purpose? Why is this being done? I think that's his basic point there.
Yeah, well, I think.
Let me answer that one. Sorry, before I go.
Come on back, Bart. You're not done yet.
And if I dare compliment that person, that's like the most excellent question. I went to a church once, and they said, "Ask us why. Ask why. We want to explain everything." And after a while, the minister said, "Stop asking why. Leave, please." And so
it's time to tithe.
Why? When President Clinton was asked, "Why did you have your affair?" Mind you, after saying he did not 20 times. When he finally told the truth, he said the reason was because I could. Because I could get away with it. You can say it was to bluff the Soviets into the strategic capability of the U.S. You could say it was to embezzle money to funnel into Cambodia during the Vietnam War. You could say this, you could say that. But the real reason is the federal government is arrogant. And not only did they fake it one time, they faked it 6 times, treating us as suckers, embezzling money and using it to deceive us and to pay the salaries of CIA agents that murdered our neighbors. That's why they did it, because they could. They are gangsters that run the federal government. And if the moon landing fraud comes out, it will put it to an end. And it probably will not end unless the truth about the moon landing fraud comes out. It's the only thing that will shock the public and the government. Has it gotten that bad? Yes, it has. So why did they do it? Because they could get away with it.
Well said. Thank you.
And then on that note, God bless. Check out Jarrah's work at his website and mine, Sibrel.com.
I feel like that was a mic drop moment. from Bart Sibrel. Thank you, Bart.
Yeah, it's good to meet you.
Well, and we've got a couple other questions, but Jarrah, what do you say? What is the ultimate purpose of this?
Well, like Bart said, there was ultimately a propaganda war with the Soviet Union. They were blabbing off their big mouths, trying to say, "Oh, look what we can do." And I have to say that both sides, they were both guilty in an extent of exaggerating about their technical capabilities. Like the Soviets, they were known to hide their failures a lot. And whenever there was the Americans that happened in full view of the world, we see rockets blowing up on the pad or in flight left, right, and center. Whereas the Soviets, they used to seem to pull one out of the hat after another. Well, the truth is nobody really knew about that because the Soviets, they kept sweeping their failures under the rug. They didn't want to talk about their disasters. And the same case with NASA. They were very cagey about certain other things. Like, I interviewed Roger Beaujolais. Right off the bat, Beaujolais didn't believe that the missions were a fake, but he was the engineer who tried to prevent the Challenger disaster. He was the one who documented the fact that the cold would have an adverse effect on the O-rings. He was the night before the Challenger disaster. He and some colleagues were phoning up NASA, basically telling them it was too unsafe to launch in the cold weather. They were going to be launching at a temperature much lower than anything they had seen previously. On the coldest launch prior to that, it was 53 degrees Fahrenheit. The first O-ring had failed, and the second one got eroded by the hot gases going through. Because if you understand the way the solar rockets work, they slot together like this. They'll want to buckle around the place, you see, during the liftoff, because all the pressures are sitting inside, and they'll want to leak gases. So they have those two O-rings in there to prevent the gases from coming out. He was arguing that it was too unsafe to launch in cold weather. They ignored him, and after the disaster, they tried to sweep everything under the rug, make it look like it was an accident. You can look up my interview with Roger Beaujolais. He went on to record to say NASA has a history of being less than truthful about their screw-ups. And of course, which brings us back to this whole Apollo thing, all right? Once again, Beaujolais didn't believe that the missions were faked. He actually worked on the LEM, and I guess he didn't want to believe they were faked. He'd already suffered post-traumatic stress disorder from what happened after Challenger. But getting to the whole matter of the matter is that they knew that the radiation was hazard. They had the CIA try to find out what the Soviets knew about the radiation, obviously, as you pointed out, with these JFK files. And they knew that they needed a meter of water to shield you from the radiation in the Van Allen belts and from solar flares and the like. They couldn't lift that kind of shielding, so they had to find a workaround. In this case, they were faking it. And I have there's one other book here I have here, yes. I mentioned earlier how the Soviets, they had a proof of concept as to how they would fake a mission to the moon such that the people receiving the radio signals would be fooled. I've got the passage here. This is
that's called the first Soviet cosmonaut team.
Yes, correct.
I just want to say it out loud so that all of the audio listeners know what we're talking about. The first Soviet cosmonaut team.
Yes, this is by Colin Burgess and Rex Hall. Now he has an interview clip here with Pavel Popovich, one of the cosmonauts. He writes here, "When we realized we would never make it to the moon, we decided to engage in a little bit of hooliganism. We asked our engineers to link the on-the-probe receiver to the transmitter with a jumper wire. Moon flight missions were controlled from the command center in the Yevpatoria in the Crimea. When the Zonda 5 was on its path around the moon, I was at the center. So I took the mic and said, 'The flight is proceeding according to normal. We're approaching the surface.' Seconds later, my report, as if from outer space, was received on the Earth, including by the Americans. The U.S. Space Advisor Frank Borman got a phone call from President Nixon. It was actually President Johnson. His memory must be in an error. Old age catching up with him, I guess. Who asked, 'Why is Popovich reporting from the moon?' My joke caused real turmoil. In about a month's time, Frank came to the USSR, and I was instructed to meet him at the airport. Hardly had he walked out of his plane when he shook his fist at me and said, 'Hey, you space hooligan.'" Which, keep in mind as well, Frank Borman was the commander of Apollo 8, so that's quite the allegation, quite the hypocrite to be throwing that around. "Hey, you space hooligan."
That's a great nickname, Space Hooligan. And we're still joined by Jarrah White. We're so thankful he's joined us tonight on All Things Unexplained. Bart Sibrel joined us too. He's had to take leave of us. And before we ask Jarrah just a couple more listener questions, and and we're out of here for tonight. We want to thank everybody for joining us all over the world tonight. Thank you. We really appreciate you. We couldn't do this show without you, and we do it for you as well. All our great listeners around the world. I want to thank Smitty Nays for joining me tonight. I'm Dr. Mounts. This is All Things Unexplained. I want to give a shout out to a couple of our friends of the show that also have YouTube channels. And I'm not going to read their comment here, but y'all bless our friends, UFO Busters at UFO Show from Australia. They've been deeply affected by some of the topics tonight. And if you get a chance to check out their YouTube channel, please do so at UFO Busters, that UFO Show Australia. I mean, this moon landing faking business has really touched them on a personal level. And so we're thinking about y'all tonight. And I know they missed CJ tonight. By the way, shout out to CJ. She couldn't be with us tonight. And UFO Busters are big fans of our wonderful female co-host, CJ, who just couldn't be with us tonight. Instead, we got Smitty. UFO Busters might not be as big of a Smitty fan as they are a CJ.
I think they are.
I know they appreciate Smitty. I could say they appreciate Smitty. And also, shout out to our friend Christian Carroll tonight, who does a wonderful YouTube show called The Portal Room. Check that out as well. And just a couple more questions for you, Jerry. You've been so generous and kind with your time with us tonight. And Smitty, this question comes from Megan in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Well, thank you, Megan. And it says, have you ever played pickleball? And if so, how seriously do you take it?
I don't even know what that means. I've never heard of that. I'm not sure if that's an American term, but I've never heard of pickleball. I'm not really a sporting chap.
Yeah. It's similar to tennis.
And ping pong.
Yeah, it's kind of taken over the United States right now. So
no, it's the fastest growing sport in the world, not just the
in the
United
world.
States.
Excuse me,
Jerry, you'll have to Google it. Yeah, they don't even build neighborhoods here anymore until they have already designed the pickleball courts, because they have determined people will not move into the neighborhood if they don't have pickleball courts with golf cart parking. So
okay, I see. I'm looking it up now. I see.
Oh, yeah.
It's a racket or paddle sport in which 2 or 4 players use a smooth-faced paddle to hit a perforated hollow plastic ball. Okay, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I'm not really a sporting chap, so not really a question for me.
It's what we call wiffle balls, basically.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of with the wiffle ball.
Actually, the only sports I am really interested in, I guess, is, if it really counts, is horse racing and motorsport.
Okay.
Oh, that counts. I think you can put some money on both those too. So
we got plenty of NASCAR here.
Oh yeah, and some horse tracks. So this next question, Jared, comes from Lisa in Portland, Oregon, and I think that this is a really important question to address when it comes to moon landing hoax theories.
It says, do you think private space companies like SpaceX will ever send live, uncut footage from the moon?
Well, there's already been the Dish network, which provided the EchoStar 11. They sent a probe up into not all the way to the moon, but up to geostationary orbit. Geostationary orbit is basically something like 35,000 kilometers up, and it's at that altitude. The time it takes for the spacecraft to orbit the Earth is the same time it takes for the Earth to rotate. As a consequence, it always sees the one side of the Earth the entire time. I know that they had the Dish network had the EchoStar 11 broadcasting a live feed of the Earth between 2008 and 2012, I believe. I actually posted a clip of that, a sped up clip from that spacecraft. It's very, very interesting to watch. And but when it comes to, I was once a big supporter of SpaceX. I published several videos because Elon Musk, he was talking about how he could solve the radiation problem and get people to Mars for only $500,000 per person. His idea was that we would, reuse the rocket, and so you're only really paying for the propellant. That's all you're going to pay for in the long run. But what must be stated is that back in 2010, 2012, when he was proposing this stuff, he was promising a modern day equivalent of the Nova rocket or the UR-700M rocket, these gigantic rockets that could have easily lifted something like 500 tons to Earth orbit. what he ended up delivering was the modern day equivalent of the N1 rocket, the Soviet equivalent of the Saturn V, which had 30 engines in the first stage alone. The Soviets, they had 4 tests of that rocket, and each test turned into a disaster. And the Starship hasn't proved to be much better. And it ultimately, I was on the Apollo Detectives, a YouTube channel a few months back where we discussed this. So you can look at that up, and we did a whole video about that, about all these promises, all these exaggerated claims that ultimately, in more ways than one, quite literally blew up in space, in Elon Musk's face. So it's I had high hopes for SpaceX, and ultimately it turned out to be a bunch of overblown hype and exaggerated claims. So I was once confident that they could solve the problem, but as it is now, the Starship is in just such disarray. I can't see them, having a rocket capable of lifting the shielding that we need to get past the Van Allen radiation belt.
I accidentally gave a little preview of a great song that you might have heard at the very beginning of our show tonight called Moonbase Horizon, and Jarrah's going to tell us a little bit about that in just a minute. But Jarrah, I had a question for you, and this will be our last question for you for tonight. We've talked about some extreme topics on this show, and very few of them are as controversial for whatever reason. I find this really perplexing as this topic. Why is the moon landing such a divisive topic, Jarrah?
Well, I think it's because a lot of people have a lot of sentimental value to it. National pride. People in the United States have a source of national pride in the moon landings, and that, we are the first to land on the moon. Even in Australia, it's a bit of a touchy subject because I used to get asked a lot. What about Australia? Were they part of the conspiracy? You act as if the Australian tracking stations were not affiliated with NASA, because people think they, pick places like Honeysuckle Creek and parks and stuff. They act as if they're independent of NASA. Well, no, they were part of the Manned Spaceflight Center, the Manned Spaceflight Network, which was basically the group of NASA contracted or NASA owned facilities to receive the signals. Because it was Australia who supposedly received the first signals from the surface of the moon on Apollo 11. Even in Australia, there's some level of pride in that. We were the first to receive the signals, But again, it boils back to that Pavel Popovich Zond 5 example, which they initially duped people into thinking they sent Soviets around the moon, but obviously, all it would take to fool people would basically send another spacecraft to the moon, land on the moon, unmanned, of course, and have that beam back all the videos and signals and whatnot. Anybody on the receiving end, they wouldn't be the wiser. And I guess I've actually had this conversation with people who are at the tracking stations. I asked them, how do you know that NASA didn't pull a Zond 5 on you? They just end the conversation right there. They don't want to proceed in that any longer. And I remember when I did my geology course, I had there was one of my professors who was actually he had actually written a report. I understand had written a report with Harrison Schmidt, who was supposedly the only geologist to fly to the moon on Apollo 17. And he had written this paper. We were doing I did my degree at Macquarie University. We did a various geophysical surveys. One of them was a gravity experiment, we measured the gravitational strength using a gravitometer. The idea was we would drive off campus. There were these 2 underground tunnels which we would set the gravitometer up on there and use that to check, okay, here's the variations in the gravity strength. We would use it to detect those tunnels. And we went in separate cars. And the person who was my peer who was riding with the teacher mentioned that I doubted the moon missions. And I'll kid you not, when we got to the site, first thing he said to me was, "So you don't like the moon landings, Jarrah?" I said, "It's not that I don't like the moon landings. It's just I don't believe they happened." And we got into a big this is supposed to be a learning experience. The only thing I remember from that field trip was me and him arguing back and forth about the rocks. He would say, "What about this? What about that?" He would argue that he said, there's no water in those rocks. Well, yes, there is. I've got reports that say there was up to 6,000 parts per million of water in those rocks, and the ferric iron oxide, as I mentioned before. He was saying, we have meteorites that have been proven to be from the moon, thanks to the Apollo samples. And I said to him, are those the same meteorites that were initially classed as eucrites and haldites and diogenites? These are rocks from the asteroid Vesta is, oh, before we had the moon landings? And I said, no, after we had the moon landings. I was mentioning the names of all the rocks. All the rocks have their own serial number that they can use to identify with and stuff. And so that's literally all I remember from that thing, me and him back and forth. And the other students, they were just standing a bit further back. I'm not getting involved. Which, that's what it is. You know, people there take offense to that kind of kind of stuff, you know, and I guess they take it kind of personal.
Right.
It is what it is. I made it clear to my peers. I made it clear to my professors. I do not care that I am a scientific minority when it comes to the moon missions.
Great points. And you know, just to back that up, shout out to Galactic Family Podcast. Check out their YouTube channel. Friend of the show. This is a great episode, brother. You know, speaking of CJ and I, Jarrah, we're told that we were in the Galactic Federation. And nobody batted an eye at that, which is fine. But our last episode on the moon landing, holy moly, did that cause some problems. I just find it very, very interesting. So, Jarrah, like I said, your first, at the very beginning tonight, we heard a great song called Moon Horizon, I believe it is.
Moonbase Horizon.
Moonbase Horizon. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how people can find out more about Jarrah White? And I see a little thing here about Trojan Smersh.
Yeah, that's my first novel that's coming out. I actually, Sid Tanner was a Australian super spy protagonist that I created back in the 2000s. I wrote these stories to entertain my step-grandfather. And I wrote up a few chapters. I read them to him. He enjoyed them. I continued writing. Eventually, I have a manuscript. He enjoyed them so much, I wrote a sequel. Eventually, I have an entire series of manuscripts. I was writing. You can pause the music for a second. Yes. So basically, I wrote a series of stories about Sid Tanner, which was basically like an Australian version of James Bond or modern day Ned Kelly. Ned Kelly, of course, was the bulletproof outlaw. Basically, wore all this armor to protect himself from getting shot. And anyways, I was writing a 7th story. My step-grandfather passed away, and I vowed to make the character known all around the world. And obviously, I got kind of distracted here and there. I got a bit sidetracked with everything that was going on in my offline life. And then towards during the COVID-19 pandemic, I went back into writing these stories. I started writing up an epic origin story to explain how Sid Tanner became who he is. While I was writing that story, the January 6th insurrection happened, and there was all kinds of talks about how much worse it could have been. And from all those talks, an idea came to my head, and I ended up with Trojan Smersh, which is basically Sid Tanner is on the run. He's seen too many secrets from his time with the U.S. Space Force, or as they were called back in his time, the U.S. Air Force Space Command. Everybody likes to claim, oh, Trump invented the Space Force. Well, no, all they did was he took the already existing U.S. Air Force Space Command, slapped a new name on it, and claimed he invented something. Anyways, my character, Sid Tanner, he worked for the U.S. Air Force Space Command during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and basically learned too many dark secrets. And he's been on the run ever since. He finds himself on the receiving end of an assassination attempt. He gets the upper hand on his assassin, who was from the Russian intelligence agency Smersh, and he learns of a conspiracy involving the Trump administration and Smersh to basically a sinister plot has been planned for the January 6th insurrection. Okay, and basically Tanner follows the clues and tries to thwart it from within. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, he was with the Space Force, as it's known now, and he learned various dark secrets. My books are built on the premise that for the longest time, people don't realize this nowadays, but back in the 60s and the 50s, it looked like the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Army were going to be having their own space program alongside NASA. NASA would do the scientific missions, whereas the Air Force would do all these military space flights, things like the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, which was a manned satellite reconnaissance mission, and the Dinosaur, which was a space plane, a space bomber, something to drop bombs from space, from orbit. And but of course, they also had various other proposals. One of them was, of course, Moonbase Horizon, or Project Horizon as it was known. And I created this song, a few songs actually, to promote my book. And this song actually discusses that one of those dark secrets that Tanner learns. Feel free to play the song now.
This is Moonbase Horizon.
Yes, correct. You can play it from the beginning if you want.
Yeah, let me see if I get it restarted here. Okay, restart Moonbase Horizon. Yeah, here we go. It just has such an epic sound to it.
They said we'd reach the final frontier, a leap beyond the stratosphere. But stars don't shine in cardboard skies, and truth is wrapped in widespread lies. They promised a dream on lunar sand, a fortress high under our command. The stars we reached but couldn't stay, radiation stole the brave away. 10 men dead, vanished to space, forgotten tales in time's cold embrace. Kennedy's deadline is fast approaching.
Kennedy.
Our hopes are gone, the myths encroaching. A stage of dust, a film reel spun. The moon's a stage for everyone. Moonbase Horizon, a mirage in the dark, chasing the heavens, left a ghostly mark. Moonbase Horizon, the mission's fake, the flags wave, that's a big mistake. The world believed, but we all know a stage descent, it's just a show. Moonbase Horizon, the great pretend, the broadcast plays, the truth will bend. No footprints mark that lunar sand. It's all a lie, it's all a scam. The stars are watching, they always knew. To Moonbase Horizon, we never flew. They sent the rockets to the sky, but shadows whispered truth and lies. Our rockets soared, the world all saw it, but we never left low Earth orbit. The lander touched down, no one aboard. Our relayed signals is what the world heard. A mission wrapped in cosmic glow, yet secrets festered down below. Moonbase Horizon, a mirage in the dark, chasing the heavens, left a ghostly mark. Moonbase Horizon, the mission's fake, the flags wave, that's a big mistake. The world believed, but we all know a stage descent, it's just a show. Moonbase Horizon, the great pretend, the broadcast plays, the truth will bend. No footprints mark that lunar sand. It's all a lie, it's all a scam. The stars are watching, they always knew. To Moonbase Horizon, we never flew.
I still feel like this song could be on. What's that with Hugh Jackman?
Will never know the truth that hide beneath the show. The light of stars can burn too bright, so they built their truths in a cave of night. Illusion sold as futures bright in the mirage of the moon's soft light. Promises fade as echoes scream. Hope dissolves in this
Epic and dramatic.
dream.
I agree.
One man digs a rogue agent stray. He's seen the cracks, he's on the way. The voice they tried so hard to drown, Sid Tanner will bring this hoax down. Moonbase Horizon, a mirage in the dark, chasing the heavens, left a ghostly mark. Moonbase Horizon, the mission's fake, the flags wave, that's a big mistake. The world believed, but we all know a stage descent, it's just a show. Moonbase Horizon, the great pretend, the broadcast plays, the truth will bend. No footprints mark that lunar sand. It's all a lie, it's all a scam. The stars are watching, they always knew. To Moonbase Horizon,
Greatest Showman.
we never flew.
Yep. So yeah, when I was writing this Sid Tanner's backstory with the with his involvement in the U.S. Air Force Space Command and learning all these dark secrets, I didn't want to potentially alienate potential readers or publishers and stuff. So I took what I call the Capricorn 1 approach, and that is I took missions, added fictional missions, and added them to the timeline, and made those the hoaxes that Sid Tanner learns about. And obviously, the Moonbase Horizon that plays a huge part of his backstory, the secrets. If you want to the main discussion the main premise of the book is, of course, is about the January 6th insurrection. If you want to play the trailer I sent you can share that with the others.
Not sure. I'm not sure I can pull the trailer up, but they are asking, can you link the song in the chat? How can our guests get to the song, Jarrah?
It's on my YouTube channel. You'll be able to find that, plus several others I produced to promote my book. I produced The Day MAGA Died. I think that's the best one. And my friend Scott Machikoti and we produced The Turn of Time. And there's also a reprise to Moonbase Horizon called Skylab 7, which you'll find there. I'm currently working on another song as well to further promote the book. The book itself, I'm actually overseeing the final proofread, so hopefully that should be out later this month or early next. It will be the start of my Sid Tanner series, and I hope it's the start of a new era.
Awesome.
In the meantime, for those who want to look into the Apollo moon landing hoax, I can recommend getting Ralph Renee's book. Since he passed away, I acquired the copyrights to his book, and I've been keeping it in print ever since. You can get it from ralphrenee.com, and you can follow my various articles. I've also published various articles on Aulis, which is David Percy's website, aulis.com, and I've published several articles there about the moon landing hoax. And you can also find my website about my book, jarrahwhite.com, my videos on my YouTube channel, White Jarrah, which is, of course, that's what originally it was Jarrah White, but I had to swap it around after Mark Gray got my first account suspended. It was bogus DMCA claims. And then, of course, I have moonfaker.com, which is where I post a lot of news updates about my moon projects and various links to my various videos that I produced along these lines.
Apology Corner says, my favorite part of this song is the glow of Jarrah's face as he listens, like a mother watching her baby saying its first words. Very, very aptly put there, Apology Corner. So thanks so much to Jarrah White for joining us tonight. For those interested in the direct link to the song, Moonbase Horizon, we'll post that in the show description. And Jarrah, thank you so much for joining All Things Unexplained tonight. I am Dr. Mounts, and here's what I'll say about the moon landing hoax. You know, we've done one show on this before. I find this an endlessly fascinating topic. One of the things I like about the moon landing theories is that it can make a true debate. I feel like I can be on one side of the argument that the moon landings did take place, and I can be on the other side of the argument that they did not take place. And I feel like I can make almost equally valid arguments for both. And to me, that makes this an infinitely interesting topic. You know, I don't know if we went to the moon. I'm torn on this. For one thing that makes me torn is I believe in the Roswell incident in 1947. But the problem with that is, if you believe that Roswell happened, then it forces you to reframe how you view everything that came after Roswell in 1947. Well, for me personally, Dr. Mounts, from All Things Unexplained, I don't know if we went to the moon. I don't know if it was a hoax. But what I do know is that there's much more to the story than what they're telling us. Smitty, you want to take us out for tonight?
I just appreciate everybody tuning in. We're glad to have Jarrah and Bart, and it's been so eye-opening, I believe. But just remember, if you're out there, be happy, be strange, listen to All Things Unexplained. Thank you for tuning in.
Okay.
And before we go, we have another super sticker from Apology Corner. Apology Corner, thank you so much. We suppose that means we're still alive. That's according to Bart, if the coroner has to issue an apology. But we might be undead, so there's also that. But, you know, my daughter watches this thing called, what is it called? K-pop Demon Hunter. So there's just a lot of things out there now that, who knows? There's some interesting stuff out there. Thank you so much, Apology Corner. You're welcome back to All Things Unexplained anytime. Smitty, Jarrah, Thanks, guys.
Good
I
night.
appreciate you.
Yeah,
And Bart,
I'm gonna play,
until next time, you want me to play your song on the way out?
yeah, play Bart's song on the way out.
Hard
Here
song.
is-
Let me see if I can pull it up here. This is Moon. Bart's Moon Man song. I think I've got it here. Tell me if y'all can hear this. Bart's Moon Man song. It's about to start, I think. This is on YouTube. Just search Bart's Moon Man song. Do y'all hear that?
I don't hear nothing.
No.
Oh dear.
Let me pull it up. I think I can get it here. There we go. Bart's Moon Man song. Get on up there. Bart's. Yep. Here we go. Bart's Moon Man song. Everybody hear it.
When I was born in 65, Grandma Ruth said never lie. The key to life was only truth. Listen to Grandma, old Ruth. In the Bible, Ruth used to go till the truth she was to know. Great God man said truth to be, would loose my chain, set me free. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead, my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth the die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. A funny thing, my first big film, loved and hated like the heat of a kiln. Hero to some, others wish dead. Hard success, hard head. Astronauts wild, I never flinched. My armor was the truth I pinched. Nervous now that I was groovy, sweaty palms just watching that movie. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead, my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth to die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. And cursed, punched in the face, I'm facing this life of the human race. Some say patriot, some say traitor. Guess it depends on historical speculators. Astronaut sons of the CIA to take my life far, far away. Instead, the curse fell on his head at 26. He's stone cold dead. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead, my train derailed my truth, my dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth the die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. needs to root, grow up large, a truthful shoot. Then someday when I am old, they'll tell my story I long ago told. Except now they'll say instead of Ruth, Bart's the grandpa of this old truth. Not really true, 'twas Bill before me, and Jesus my brother, waiting for me in glory. I grew up dreaming to tell my stories of fancy tales of angelic glory. Instead, my train derailed my truth by dear old grandma, old Ruth. She said the truth was worth to die, to beat old Satan, to beat his lies. I left my dreams to fight for truth, and dear old grandma, old Ruth. Like dear old grandma, old Ruth. Love dear old grandpa, old truth.
Oh, yeah. I guess you could call this an encore. We're not gone yet, Jarrah.
Yeah, that was a pretty touching tribute that Bart did for his grandmother. I just wanted to say as well, I did a tribute to my grandmother and also my step-grandfather right at the beginning of my book that's about to be released, and I would like to just read it to you. To my step-grandfather Gordon, who was entertained by Sid Tanner's adventures, and my grandmother Yvonne, who let me borrow the typewriter. That'll be right at the beginning of the book.
Very good. We appreciate you, Jarrah. Visit him at jarrahwhite.com.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Good night.
It's UFO Buster said. Hello, CJ.
Hi, CJ.
CJ, maybe next time. Good night, everybody.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic drew their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah. What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
All Things Unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, will save for closed session.